Kids who were a part of the foster care system, what are some of your horror stories? Being painfully aware that the families I was staying with did not take me in for any reason other than money. Abuse and negligence was an everyday occurrence, and I had no idea that abuse wasn't normal. My adoptive dad had an anecdote from when I was around 5 and came to live with him for the first time. I opened the fridge and with wide eyes said in disbelief, "You have food in here?" So yeah, the whole foster care system is pretty flawed and effed up. Happy I was able to get out. Story 2. Let's see. Well, I wasn't allowed to shower. Only once every couple of weeks. I had to go to other people's houses and the schools to wash. I had to walk on the freeway to school and it rained a lot in my town, so my shoes smelt very bad and my toes kind of pushed together from where the shoes got smaller, I guess. Then my toenails got infected, and they still are. I got called ugly and dumb. Oh, and the best part, the system told me to suck it up because I could get worse people. Edit. Thank you for all the support. I'm actually doing much better now. I live with my aunt and uncle and graduate as a 17-year-old senior. I was in Pittsburgh, California when all of this happened. Thank you all for the advice and support once again. Story 3. Almost failing my classes in high school because 10 teen girls in a 3-bedroom house with 2 staff members and 1 van meant getting home from everybody's drug test appointments and grocery shopping and crap at like 8 at night, and nobody was allowed to be in their rooms until bedtime, so no homework got done until 10 p.m. under my sheets with a flashlight. Only ever got half my work done and started getting into trouble for falling asleep in class. Bullied for being the only girl in the house who didn't drink and get high at every possible opportunity. New staff every month or so because the pay was crap, so never had anyone to talk to. Verbally and emotionally abused by the power-tripping female dog who owned the place and collected checks for every girl who stayed there. I got beat up for reading, had to watch Grease and Legally Blonde on repeat every night because those were the only 2 movies we had. No privacy, no respect, no compassion. We were simply cattle. I know you put it at the bottom of the totem pole of worries, and for good reason, but watching Grease every single night is no small feat. Story 4. My biological mother was autistic, very high functioning, but also suffered from extreme depression. She tried to unalive me and herself when I was 2. My aunt took me in and wanted to adopt me. She's amazing. CPS in New York City strongly supported her gaining legal custody of me, but my bio mom fought it for 5 years, despite dozens of specialists, caseworkers, and doctors testifying that my bio mom was a danger to me. The state of New York refused to give my aunt full custody. My bio mom eventually surrendered custody when I was 7 after 5 years of legal battles because she was pregnant with another child. No, that other child did not turn out okay. The amount of emotional trauma I endured as a child from having to repeatedly testify against my own mother in court still haunts me to this day, but at least I turned out okay. Edit. Wow, this exploded. Due to some questions, I figured I'd expand on what I meant by I turned out okay. I'm 32 now. I have a fantastic relationship with my aunt, whom I've called mom since she adopted me. She had me in therapy when I was a kid to deal with everything that I went through. I feel rather successful with how my life is turning out. I served 4 years in the Army, then went on and earned a BA and an MA, and now I've been a public librarian and historian for over 2 years. I have an amazing wife of 6 years, and we just had a baby last year, who's effing amazing, silly, and smart in my eyes. I'm pretty happy overall. I don't talk to my bio mom anymore. She continued to be an effed up person in my life until I decided to go no contact. Edit 2. There were still a few questions about my sibling, my half-sister, so here's the situation with that. My bio mom made a crap ton of horrible decisions in raising her that resulted in my half-sister having just an unhappy life. I never had a close relationship with my half-sister, but I did see her somewhat regularly when we were kids. She was 7 years younger than me, so we never really played together or anything. I did call Child Protective Services when she was about 10 when I witnessed my bio mom's boyfriend having a temper tantrum and breaking all the dishes in their house one afternoon. CPS did an investigation but didn't remove her. My adoptive mom even offered to take her in, but CPS never saw enough of a danger to remove her. This sort of destroyed the remaining part of my relationship with my bio mom. She continued to put my half-sister in crappy situations, including other forms of abuse throughout her early teen years. Today, she's alive, but a very self-destructive person. drugs, and mental health issues abound. It kills me to even talk to her. She confessed to me a few years ago that her biggest regret was fighting to stay with or by a mom after I called CPS, since they asked her if she'd rather leave. Story 5. I was a volunteer for our county social services department, simply helping out with office paperwork as I was a computer software engineer at the time. One of the social workers approached me one day. It told me that there was a boy that they were having difficulty placing because he simply didn't want to be a foster child and wanted to stay with his mother, who didn't want him, and asked the social services department to find him a home. I met the boy, and we seemed to hit it off the get-go, and he agreed to become my foster son. He was 10 at the time. He was with me till he turned 16, at which time I adopted him with his mother's blessings. I put him through college, and he got a great job earning quite a bit more than I was. He continued to stay with me till he got married. I became a grandpa to his great kids. His kids are adults now with families of their own, making me a great grandpa. So now, in my old age, I briefly moved into a retirement home, but my son insisted that I move in with him. He told me that I took care of him all those years, and now it was his turn to take care of me. So now I live with him and his family, and he's taking very good care of me. Oh, it's heartwarming and beautiful. You know, I think one of the hardest things is knowing how many children out there are just going unloved and uncared for. But not far behind that is knowing how many elderly people are just alone and kind of fading away. So what a beautiful little bow of just beginning to end. You took care of me, now I'm here for you. That's love. I like that. Story 6. Hopefully I'm not too late, but here goes mine. I'm typing on my phone, so excuse all the typos and such. My parents just recently got divorced, and they were fighting really bad. My mom moved us back to Florida from Illinois and had to stay at our aunt's house for a month or two. At the time, there were 4 of us. I was 3 to 4 years old. My younger brother was around 2. My older sister and brother were no older than 11 or 12. Anyway, my mom went back to Illinois to find some things and get some belongings of ours. So we lived with our aunt. Within those first 2 weeks, from what my mom told us, after signing temporary power of attorney over to my aunt, she put us in foster care. I was in multiple homes from what I can remember. I was so young, but some memories will never leave. One of the first homes was the worst one. If I didn't eat my food, I stayed the night at the kitchen table. One time I threw up and I got thrown into a room for a full day and I wasn't allowed out. I remember crying under the door saying I was sorry. That same house had like 6 to 7 kids in it. I shared a room with 4 other children. From what I remember though, the children were very nice. The parent and foster parents were terrible though. Not only did they verbally abuse us, they fought each other. The husband and wife would essentially beat the crap out of each other right in front of us. It was honestly the scariest crap I saw when I was that young. Then I got moved houses after some time. I can't remember them all, but I do remember temporarily being under the same household as my younger brother. We had a very, very nice woman and her older son, maybe husband? They were so nice. We called her Mrs. Kim, and she brought us so many toys and took us to the park all the time. She was an absolute angel. I remember her face still to this day. I hope she's doing well. Okay, I have so many questions. 1, I'm glad you're safe. I'm glad everything's fine. But how did your mom get you back? How many weeks were you gone? Did your aunt get off scot-free? She's just like, yeah, these kids are too much. Ship them out of here. Like, what? I have so many questions. Story 7. Florida ex-foster care child here. So strap in, boys and girls. I'm not worried about any doxing. This was years ago, and I don't even know if the place still exists, since I moved to the other side of the globe. There exists a company in Central Florida known as the Arnett House, which is a large compound in Ocala. Due to the lack of available foster homes, some genius decided it would be a great idea to house criminal children and foster children together, because they're all problem kids, right? You got in by either being taken into foster care and placed there, or you broke the law so many times that a Florida judge made you a resident at Arnett for rehabilitation, or both. While I was stuck there, I saw all sorts of crap. Staff members were either great or horrible, nothing ever in between. Once a fight broke out where one of the criminal girls attacked my foster friend, and the staff just sat back for a couple of minutes to watch before intervening. I ended up jumping in between them and throwing my arms out like some sort of T-pose until the staff eventually pulled the criminal girl away. Yeah, I got the nickname Jesus. My long hair at the time probably had something to do with it too. When my younger brother was moved in, I found out he, 16, was flirting and making semi-sexual moves at the mentally handicapped resident girl, 13. I talked to him about it, told him that was not okay, and he told me to mind my business. I alerted the staff, and they explained there was nothing they could do until they both ran off together and had some intimacy in the nearby woods, like a different couple had done just a few days prior. Oh, and the last story for now, I wasn't allowed to learn to drive. I lived there from age 16 to 18 when my high school offered driver's ed courses for free. I was explicitly banned from taking them because the big boss female dog claimed that if I learned to drive, I could theoretically steal their van and drive away with a bunch of other residents. Story 8. The worst 16 years of my life. Childhood was okay from what I remember, until I started in my teens and things went south. The family was very abusive. The one thing that still sticks to me out of all the abuse was watching my little autistic sister get backhanded by my father because she wouldn't stop crying. The mother threw a tin can at my face and cut it open and refused to take me to the ER, and instead superglued the cut and taped it, and it got severely infected and I had to lie about what had actually happened. Wasn't allowed to use the bathroom sometimes. I wasn't allowed to leave my bedroom. They technically held me hostage until school. They told everyone about how terrible I was, and every time I tried to get help from school, they wouldn't do anything. Even after showing proof, the family denied everything until I was moved to a different family's home while the mother went to Las Vegas for a vacation. I wasn't going back to that evil family that really wanted to destroy everything I had. And now I'm 21 and moving to France for a few weeks to get far away and hopefully start a new life. Story 9. My family adopted 8 kids through the foster adoption system. We wound up with a family of 3, a family of 4, and one with no siblings. Along the way, we had about 200 children come and go through the house. There were all sorts of horrors. We had one girl who was around 17 whose dad was a professor and an alcoholic. He both essayed her and broke her jaw with a punch. We had a small boy whose relative had tried to stab him. We had a family of 4 sisters for a while who turned out to have been essayed very severely. They had to go to another home as we had other children and it was no longer safe for those kids. We had a baby for 3 years who had RAD and was unable to form emotional bonds with other humans. All of the children we adopted permanently were born addicted to drugs and alcohol. 2 of the younger ones, twins, also had cerebral palsy and were never supposed to be able to walk or talk. Through years of occupational therapy, they are both ballerinas now and arguably talk too much. So yeah, it's been an adventure, and I could tell so many more stories. Story 10. Sorry this is very long. I've never gotten the chance to tell the whole story. This subject makes people around me uncomfortable when I talk about it. I am 22. Growing up, I lived in a very small county. My high school only had less than 500 kids total. Everyone knew everyone. I got taken into foster care when I was 16 because my mom had smacked me and then called the cops on me while she was high on drugs. She was arrested that night. It was a school night. I woke up around midnight to someone yelling my name and pounding on my bedroom door. When I opened the door, there was a social worker and 2 police officers standing in my hallway. They told me to grab my school stuff and some clothes and come with them. I cried and said goodbye to my pug. I was in foster care for a few years when I was younger and I knew I wasn't coming home again. The social worker took me to the social services building and put me in one of the visit rooms. You know, the rooms with the double-sided mirror and all the toys where they let foster kids visit their biological parents. I sat alone in that room and cried until around 7 in the morning. The social worker took me into a bathroom to change out of my pajamas and into school clothes. She took me straight to school. No sleep, no shower, nothing. She said she would pick me up after school. I got to school way early and sat and cried and waited for any of my friends to show up. On the first day, I only told 2 or 3 people what had happened. I told my best friend and my older sister, who no longer lived at home. I don't remember a lot of what happened at school that day. I just remember crying a lot and my teachers and the other students asking me what was wrong, but I was too ashamed to tell anyone else. After school, the social worker picked me up and brought me back to social services where my new foster family was waiting in the parking lot. I recognized one of the teenage girls from school. She was a year younger than me, and though I had never spoken to her, she always seemed like a huge female dog. She was one of the biological daughters. The family also had a biological son who was a year older than me, a 1-year-old daughter and 3 older daughters who no longer lived at home. There were 2 other teenage foster girls in the home who didn't go to my school. There was also a younger, maybe 3-year-old foster girl with special needs. This is where things get jumbled or spots are left blank in my memory. I just remember lots of fake smiles from them at first. I remember crying almost every day and being in trouble for it. The mother didn't let the foster kids into our room until it was bedtime. So when I'd cry, I had to do it in the living room in front of everyone. I tried to cry in the bathroom at first, but with 7 people in the house, I couldn't stay in there very long. And if the mother walked by and heard me crying, or her kids heard me and told on me, then she'd come and knock and tell me to come out to the living room. It's very dehumanizing to sit and cry in front of people nearly every day. They'd make jokes or just comment about how I was a moody and mopey person. The mother and daughter had very high school mean girl personalities. When one of the other foster girls was out of the room or away on a home visit, they would talk garbage about her and try to get us other girls to chime in. We couldn't bond or find comfort in each other because they were always driving wedges between us. The biological family called us the foster kids. The daughters also called us slaves, jokingly, they said. There was a divide in the house, us and them. We were treated inferior in every way. I don't remember a lot of the specifics, and I didn't want to go into examples of how they treated us. My mind has done a good job of erasing a lot of it. And that wasn't my main point of commenting. I haven't gotten to that yet. But I think it is important to get across that these people were just evil. They only did it for the money and spoiled their children while denying us basic needs. The father was verbally sexual towards us. The son got into a toxic relationship with one of the girls. The mother and her daughters were horribly emotionally abusive. We weren't allowed any privacy or alone time. The special needs girl that I mentioned earlier slept in a playpen in the living room downstairs by herself because she cried too much. She spent most of her time in there alone because she was a bad kid. Anyway, I wanted to comment in the first place to share how ashamed I was to be a foster kid. I eventually had to tell my teachers because I couldn't stop crying at school. I kept getting sent outside or to the office. After a few weeks, I'm sure everyone at school knew what had happened. I cannot explain how damaging it was to me personally to see the way people look at you when you're in a situation like that. My teachers, my friends, kids at school that had never liked me, judges, social workers, counselors, my sister, everyone looked at me like I was a crippled dog. I developed a real fear of looking people directly in the eyes because I couldn't handle it. I was afraid for people to feel sorry for me. People started walking on eggshells around me or avoiding me completely because it made them feel bad to know what I was going through. As well as being treated like an annoyance and less than human in the foster home, I felt like a burden to everyone who knew me. I made everyone uncomfortable. I think that's the most damage foster care did to me. It took my humanity away from me. I felt like an outcast from my own life. At home, I was one of the gross foster kids. At school, I was the girl who cries a lot and doesn't have a home or a family. At court, I was the poor girl whose mother is a drug addict. At counseling, I was the girl who had a traumatic childhood and is still suffering. I wasn't allowed to just be me anymore. Everyone took that from me and replaced it with pity and their own discomfort. I apologize for this being so dang long and disorganized. I've just never told anyone this much about that period of my life. Thank you to anyone who's listened to all of that. Story 11. I grew up as the biological son among many foster children. My family always took in other boys around my age since I was 10, and even today as I'm turning 19. Though we've had a few young kids and even a few severely challenged kids. I like to think we are one of the decent families that never locks up food and forces communal baths or any of that crazy crap. Everyone has their own rooms, and like regular teen boys, they get nagged to clean them. From my mom, but they never do. We've had a few that lived with us for years, and we'll always consider them family, invite them for Christmas and all that family stuff, especially one. Though many come through clearly angry at the world, and it makes it hard to make a meaningful connection or to not judge. Story 12. A little different, but my mom relinquished me to a group home without giving up custody when her abusive boyfriend made her choose which of us would leave. We went without groceries for 3 weeks because of employee embezzlement, so I only ate free lunch from school and nothing on weekends. My bus arrived too late to get school breakfast. We also didn't have hygiene products during this time, so I stank in dirty clothes. My home ec teacher did a fundraiser and sold cupcakes during class, and the girl at my table bought 3. I was drooling and watching her like a dog watches Thanksgiving dinner. She ate one, then looked me in the eye and said she was too full to eat the others. She spit on the 2 leftover cupcakes and then threw them away. I put my head down and cried. After class, I told the teacher I was hungry and the group home had no food. She asked me what I wanted her to do, so I just said I didn't know and I left for my next class. She never spoke about it again or even checked in to see if I'd gotten access to food. Later that week, Cupcake Girl told me I was nasty and stank so bad no one could stand me. I dropped out of school a week later. I made friends with the other group home kids, and a few of them asked if I wanted to go to the park while the guys played basketball. I did, and planned to walk with 2 of the guys to meet up with the other girls and their boyfriends. One dragged me in his room and essayed me while the other stood guard for staff. I immediately went to the director crying. Because I was still in my mom's custody, they called her when they called the police. My mom laughed and told them that it was my fault and lied about men like this all the time. So the police snapped their book shut, and the director ripped me a new one for being just another prejudiced rich white girl lying about being essayed by a black man before kicking me out. Apparently, she knew I was trouble from the start since my mama didn't want me. People had a hard time believing an upper middle class professional family just didn't want me. I always got asked, but what did you do? You must have done something. So I was a homeless teenager after that for a few years. No one got involved, no one gave a crap. It was easier to believe that I was troubled instead of accepting that a nurse and a special ed teacher were just horribly abusive to me. Story 13. Ooh, now this is one I'm prepared for. Not just because I have a lot to tell, but the system, as most call it, has been such a detriment to ever move on in life because of the daily nightmares and mental instability I have because of it. I hated it with every ounce of my being, but have learned from it as well. My worst experience, if I had to name one, was when a 4-year-old girl that was a foster sibling of mine dragged my hair across the living room, giving me carpet burn and a bald spot that lasted a couple of years. I was 8 and frail and starved within this home and begged for more portions from school to even stay awake most of the time. This girl, who didn't know better, dragged me about 14 feet and none of her older siblings or my foster mom did anything about it. Those burns that ran through my back stayed there for years. It was so red and inflamed that I had to sneak medicine when they were gone or sleep because I was never taken to a doctor. I'd hide my injuries when I wasn't already neglected just so I don't bring attention to the scalding pain that lasted for days on end. I couldn't defend myself from that incident, despite being a little older, because even if I touched my foster parents' little princess, I'd be refused food and sleep. I'd have to cramp my hand till it was numb, writing pages of "I won't touch blank again" over and over again. Then I would finally be allowed to sleep. I remember going around in circles in their small backyard once, after being locked out for hours with no way in. I was so severely depressed as a child that even after they came back, I was still in circles, trudging every ounce of strength I had to even keep myself entertained, to keep myself sane even. I knew in that home they kept most of it, if not all, the money to themselves, and gave us bare necessities once in a blue moon. There are so many stories I could tell, from my older brother getting caught up in the street gangs to escape being at home, my older sister being pregnant at 16, my younger sister muted for years, and my baby brother malnourished for his first years of life. I began reading to escape the torture of not having a family. I didn't feel that I had an identity. This trauma stays with me even now, 10 years later. Every time I think about it deeply, I just wondered why our assigned social worker never believed us. The one person that had to keep everyone in check seemed blind to my pleas, and I was brushed off as a troubled child that sought attention. I wanted attention. I wanted to scream. The system has robbed me of my childhood. I was robbed of my culture. I grew up around another that didn't accept mine and discriminated me for it. I was robbed of a sense of familiar net to fall back on when crap hit the fan. It was a hole that was and never was to be filled because I just happened to be so unfortunate to the carelessness of how the system worked for kids like me. It tore my family apart when we got back together. Then I had a niece when I was 11. We were all malnourished and anemic, and each one of us grew so distant from each other. Even now, after a decade, I haven't spoken to my older siblings in 7 months. I'm still getting over it, little by little. I have a loving, significant other, a mother who cares deeply, and a therapist who only wants me to crawl out of bed of thorns I laid down in. For so long, this period in my life defined me. It defined my illnesses, both mental and physical. It made long for things that would never be replaced. I'm slowly realizing, day by day, that it does get better. I do have relapses, and I do have self-harming thoughts, and I do have scary memories that keep me up at night. I'm most definitely not perfect, and I'm not ever going to be. Even writing this, I feel a sense of trying to bring awareness of an invisible war that thousands of children go through every day. Daily tragedies that go unnoticed, that make gang rates and teen pregnancy rates and self-unaliving rates go up due to negligent and underqualified foster parents, lack of social workers, and most importantly, lack of accountability where it needs to be. Lives that are America's future are being neglected and downplayed due to complacency and no one's desire to help broken families and broken lives. Anyway, I appreciate anyone who was willing to read my story and take on this question. It was one that really hit close to home, and I'll be happy to answer any question in the best way that I can. It's something that for some people will never go away, and I hope to overcome someday. Thank you. Story 14. Oh boy. Okay, this was a while ago, but I was in the foster care system for only about 2 months when I was 8 because my grandmother was in rehab. who raised me. Dad was in jail, and I haven't seen my birth mom since I was 1, so I had no immediate family member to take care of me. I remember I was placed with this Indian family who had this huge house, and they had a bunch of extended family members who lived with them, like the mom's grandma and grandpa, and they had like 3 kids of their own too. I'm gonna keep this short, but I have these vivid memories of the grandmother basically dragging me by one arm on multiple occasions up and down these huge stairs when no one else was home, to the point where it felt like my arm was gonna fall off. I can't even remember why, I just remember being terrified of that crazy female dog. I remember she also didn't speak English well, but would tell me she was my mom after like 2 days of knowing her, and like forced herself to bathe me when I knew how to bathe myself like any normal effing 8-year-old does. All in all, I don't remember a ton from that 2-month period, maybe because I don't want to, but I remember thinking if I ever had to go through that again, I would just run away. Luckily, my grandma got her crap together and got sober. Story 15. In junior high, grades 6 through 8 in US, typically between the ages 11ish to 14ish, typical lowest to typical highest ages, but usually 11 to 13. I dated a girl who was in the foster system. There were 4 foster boys in the house. She was 14, and in 7th grade, I was 12. We went on a date for Valentine's Day, to the mall and movies, to see the movies Batteries Not Included, about the mini flying saucer aliens. She kept putting my hand up her skirt and on her chest. I had been essayed by a babysitter for a year and a half and felt very confused and a bit victimized by it all. She kept trying to pull my chicken out and so forth. After the movie, we ate in the food court, and then she convinced me to sneak into the access hallways and make out. We kissed a lot and there was some touching, but when she took her pants off and put them in my pocket and asked me to be intimate with her, I told her I was not ready for that yet. She began crying. I told her I wanted to date her because I liked her and I thought she was awesome. We hugged and we went to the mattress store, oddly enough, and sat on a mattress while she told me about how 2 of the boys in her foster home essayed her on several occasions. That in the last 4 foster homes the fathers had all essayed or essayed her. Most of the boys in foster homes she had been in touched her or essayed her. That 2 mothers had essayed her with the fathers. That she had to shower in front of men and boys in various foster homes. That she was offered drugs and booze by the dads all the time. That she had been forced to be the girlfriend of the current dad's friend who was 27 until the guy went to jail for drugs and robbery. It was the saddest thing I've ever heard. We dated for the rest of the year. Then she got sent to live with her mom. Not a good thing. This was in 1987, so cell phones, especially for kids, was not a thing. She had my number, but her foster parents went through all her stuff before she left and trashed a lot. I forgot about her pants until I got home. Asked her how she wanted me to give them back to her. She told me to keep them, and I had them for most of puberty. Another girlfriend found them and threw them out a few years later. As for if we did naughty stuff after that date, some, but that's not really part of the story. I did tell my dad what she told me, and he went to the foster house. She told me that after that, they left her alone. No touching and nothing intimate. She considered my dad a hero. I don't know what all he did or said. He will still not talk about it. But when he came home, he saddled his horse and rode alone through the woods on their ranch for a few hours, not coming back until dark. My mom had to bandage his hands. My dad is the most awesome man I know. He is my stepdad, but he has always been a real dad, kind of my hero as well. Sorry, I was kind of making this about me too. My point was how horrible foster system was for her. Story 16. I've never talked about this publicly before, and this might get buried, but here it goes. My story is pretty different than most here. I was in foster care for 6 months when I was a teenager, after my parents basically got sick of dealing with my mental illness and got rid of me for a while. I don't really have stories of being treated poorly. It's more just the feeling of betrayal from being put there in the first place. Some backstory. I have schizophrenia and OCD, and when I was a teenager, I was really up and down and out of control for a while, due to not being on the right meds. I'd freak out, fight with my sister, hurt myself, refuse to eat, and I was just a general mess. One day I got in a fight with my sister, and my parents called the police on me. They told me to pack a bag and that they were taking me to the county's emergency foster care house. It was a woman who took in kids who needed to go somewhere on short notice. There were only a couple other kids there, one of which I actually knew from school, so that was kind of nice. The woman wasn't always too nice to me, though. She'd had hundreds of kids go through there, so I wasn't anything special or different. Just another kid to her. Everything felt impersonal and distant. One night, I think my first or second night being there, she woke me up at 1 a.m., screaming at me and accusing me of using her toothbrush. I swore up and down that I didn't, and she insisted that I did, and kept going on about how disgusting I was. That was probably the worst I was treated during this whole period. I was there for about 10 days before we had a meeting with the county, and I was moved to a semi-permanent placement. That actually was not bad. The couple was older, in their late 60s, and very sweet. They had a big house, and I was the only kid there, so they actually paid attention to me and cared for me. They gave me an allowance, allowed me to have pets, took me out for dinner frequently, allowed me to have friends over. Overall, the experience there was really nice. The foster parents worked through an agency that I'd go up to once a week for therapy and case meetings, and it was actually a lot of fun there. Everyone who worked there was super nice, and I got to meet a lot of kids in my age with similar problems. Once a month, we'd go places like the pool or the zoo, and on Saturdays, there was a girls group. The nicest part was that the agency was owned and run by friends of my grandma's that I'd known since I was a child, and it was really helpful that I had someone I knew around. One of the girls I met there became close with me, and a couple of years later, she ended up attending my school. She and I are still good friends now. Then one day, I was meeting with my therapist, asking when I got to go home for the millionth time, and she told me it was a voluntary placement, so whenever your parents are ready. This was news to me. My parents had been telling me for months that this was ordered by the county, and I had finally learned the truth. I felt completely betrayed and abandoned. My own parents didn't want to deal with me and got rid of me. I was only in foster care for about 6 months total before I got to go home, and overall the experience was fine, but I've still never been able to come to terms with the fact that my parents willingly put me there, and it hurts me to this day over 10 years later. Story 17. Kind of late to the party here, but I feel like whoever reads this can take some important information from it. Obviously, a throwaway. I was in foster care for around 9 months in 2010 through 2011, but my parents deny me being in it or there ever being any circumstances that would require foster care. I was taken out of my parents' home because both of my parents were abusive drunks. Like there are a few child head-shaped holes in the walls kind of abusive. When I was in foster care, both me and my little sister were essayed by other foster kids and biological children to the multiple foster parents we stayed under. And during the time I spent away from them with my friends, I was often made fun of for my parents being pieces of crap and not loving me. My parents were desperately trying to get custody, and I was told to lie by both my parents, their relatives, my own sisters, my foster parents, and most of my caseworkers, but I wanted out so badly. I was eventually convinced that going against my parents is the worst thing a child can do, so I lied for them. Now I'm 19 and struggling hard with PTSD, wanting to self-unalive, thoughts, and depression. I can't form normal relationships. Affection scares me and I can't remember the last time I was happy. Right now, I'm slowly repairing the damage that was done from just my parents, but there is so much more I'm struggling with and I just want to end it all. F foster care, F parents. Story 18. I was and am a survivor. I made it. I'm still here. I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm actually pretty normal. Sorta, but kinda. At least a little. I discovered foster care when I was 4. Apparently being physically abused and starved half to death finally tipped the scales. Then again, shoplifting loaves of bread and packs of bologna from the store next door eventually struck a chord in somebody's conscience, and we were busted. Me and 3 siblings were finally liberated. Of course, the great state of Kansas put us in a different home. Nothing like being yanked from your crappy life and your siblings are no longer there. Good times, huh? The first night I finally fell asleep, then woke up and had to pee, but I was scared to go to the bathroom, so I tried to pee out the window. That was an adventure I would like to forget. Heck, I'm 49. That crap is not going away ever. Then we could delve into the fact the state of Kansas let me be adopted unto a family that featured an alcoholic dad, a do-nothing-about-it mother, and lots of effed up kids. The positives? I ate well. I experienced intimacy at a young age. My shoplifting was for candy and trinkets after I was adopted. The negatives? I was essayed. My drunken dad beat my mom. I'm an alcoholic. I was physically abused by a future killer, and so much more. On a positive note, despite the alcohol, I'm still a good dad. Story 19. I was not a foster child, but my mom has fostered a bit of them. She's really good with them, though I think she's a bit too soft on occasion. The first kid, and the worst, went several months without any food and survived by eating candies with her mom. I'm not sure, but I think she was also essayed and beat. She was like 5? That wasn't what made her the worst kid. The worst thing was that her mom spoiled her to heck. Once, my mom was taking her to a kid's party and she stated, "They're going to say that I'm the prettiest one there, right?" To which my mom responded, "No, they're going to say that I'm the prettiest one." Then she started crying. She also made my sister cry in multiple occasions by telling her that my mom didn't love her, my sister, and preferred her, the foster child. Honestly, that one girl was the only one who made me want to backhand her as hard as I could. I get that they go through rough things and deserve pity, but that doesn't make them angels. Thankfully, after a while, my mom got used to the balancing discipline with rewards, and now all of the kids she get are well behaved, but still loved. Story 20. Aging out. You have no one to turn to, no one to tell how to be an adult. I remember being 18 and crying my eyes out because I thought I could be arrested for not being able to pay my electric bill or just bills in general. Predatory people in general. You trust abusive or toxic people very easily. Where do you go for holidays? I have an awesome best friend whose mom begs me to come for holidays, but I usually choose to work because it just feels weird. Every time you accomplish something, no one is there to cheer you on. Now in my 30s, I've made a handful of awesome friends that are a huge help, but it took me a while to learn how to have a healthy relationship. Another thing is that a lot of us are introverts due to being ostracized at school and having to live in group homes or overcrowded foster homes where we just a paycheck to a crappy foster parent. You just want quiet, and you are really okay being alone. A lot of us lead nomadic lifestyles because we've become so used to the constant shuffling. I suppose I'll edit if I think of something else. Story 21. I was in it for 1.5 years. My mother, who I love very much, has very bad depression and anxiety disorders, when in combination can cause her, when it is really bad, to take a full bottle of pills because the stress is literally physically painful. She signed her rights up to the state because my younger half-sister, who was essayed when she was younger by a stepbrother, different story for a different time, was claiming every man under God's blue sky was essaying her. That list was not excluding me, my older brother, my mother's boyfriend, and a couple more. She was claiming this to a state counselor, so a case was opened and my mother, who was already stressed out about my older brother, 15 at the time, legal issues as he developed kleptomania, plus her own mental issues at the time, decided she best should sign her rights up as she didn't have the skills necessary to handle all of this. My half-sister got sent to her dad's home. I got sent to the Gregories. Brother got sent to the second home I went to. First family, the Gregories, I went to was an interracial couple, white and black. Me coming from a white family with very small exposure to black people, this probably saved me from being racist. I truly learned all races are just like me. I moved 1 year into my stint to live with my biological brother, Jeff. Met the foster dad and mom. Their names were Eric and Tina. They grew up together and had been married for 10 years. They had a wild childhood together, but were ready to slow down and experience the whole family thing. Sadly, they struggled getting pregnant. Eric already worked at a foster care shelter, so he and Tina decided to do in-home foster care. In addition to me and Jeff, they had my 2 foster brothers, Cordero and Jonathan. Jonathan came from a single-parent home. Mother, she went crazy and kept him inside 24/7 and made him drink hydrogen peroxide to clean the demons out. His teeth looked translucent towards the tips. Cordero was a gigantic black kid, 6'7", 300 pounds, high-functioning special needs, slow, from New Orleans. I really loved everyone from this house, as well as the first house, but this one was home. My first home in a long year. I loved and still love everyone from the system, but Eric was so effing special to me. He literally was the first real father figure I had. My biological dad is a part of my life, but in terms of just providing, never connecting. I respect my biological dad, but Eric would connect with me on a personal level. He played games with me, talked sports, helped me with homework, properly disciplined me for doing bad. He was the best male figure in my life up until 14. My mom did all the necessary classes to get me back because she's a bad mother dog. In the winter break of 2008, I moved back with my mother, and my brother stayed in foster care to age out of the system, and because he kind of enjoyed it there. 6 months after moving back with my mom, my brother unexpectedly moved back home. Apparently, Tina had been sleeping with Cordero. Eric moved back to Odessa, Texas to be with his family and divorced Tina. I visited him one time about 8 months after. I could tell he fell off the sober wagon. He told me Tina had moved back to Odessa as well, but not to be with him, just to be near her family. I found out short after leaving that visit that Tina had given birth to a kiddo shortly after the divorce. It wasn't Eric's. He still treated this kid like his own, though, picking him up and spending time with it. He was truly a kind soul. Eric never recovered. He died in 2015. I hadn't talked to him in about 1.5 years. I never asked what the cause was, and I don't want to know for sure. He had a bad heart from birth, had to have an artificial valve or something that clicked to the beating of the heart. I think his heart gave out from the drugs, but I don't want to know. He is still my hero I aspire to be and the kind soul that he was. This post hurt to type, and I truly appreciate anyone who reads it. Please don't ever put off talking to someone because tomorrow is just as good as today. Story 22. I was taken from my drug addict parents who sold me to strangers to use when I was a toddler so they could buy drugs and put in foster care when they both got arrested for unrelated drug charges. It was never found out that they sold me. The first place I went was Kids Cottage in Reno, Nevada, a group home where they separated me from my 7-year-old brother who was my only acting parent. When we finally got moved to an actual foster home, it was a fairly well-off family who had a large property in what was then the middle of the desert. This woman beat us early and often, made us work in her yard in the high heat of the day at 5, me, and 7, my brother. When my brother puked due to the heat exhaustion, she let him lay down for 30 minutes, then made him come back out to continue working and made him bury his own vomit. I would get up in the middle of the night and either use the restroom or wander. I liked going to their bay windows and looking out across the desert at the Reno city lights. She caught me one night and decided to curb this. She would put a crib upside down over my bed to keep me there. When I inevitably wet the bed, she beat me furiously and put me in diapers. When she found out I learned to move the crib to slide out, she started taping it down. She literally effing caged me. When I still got out, she threw me against the sharp corner of my brother's bed and almost split my forehead clean open. I remember the blood turning my vision red. I still have the dent in my head. She would regularly let us go days without eating, and when we would eat, we'd get a single cold, stale corn dog or cereal with water instead of milk. The next home was my maternal aunt. She ended up adopting us by getting her sister to forge my biological father's, who was working to get us back, signature, and then it went to crap. I became free slave labor for them, and they made me a robot. I was not to do anything they did not tell me to do. They would beat me over my head with their fist, whip me with metal coat hangers, hot wheel tracks, iron rebar, whatever it was in arm's reach, really. I would get it. Again, I would go without food for days, and she would single me out and feed me liver and onions, tripe, dried out bars, and hot dogs, whatever. She removed all belongings from my room at one point and left me with a bare mattress. I was 10 years old. I was not allowed to leave my room for any reason without her permission. When I would pee in the corner of my room, she would beat me for it rather than letting me access a restroom when I needed to. She would consistently warn me if anyone ever found out what happened at home, I would be separated from my siblings and never see any of them again, to instill in me that I should never tell. Due to the consistent abuse I faced my entire childhood, I developed dissociative identity disorder and alters. When I told her about the voices in my head that took over my body, she attempted to beat the demons out of me. She cornered me in the kitchen and waylaid my head with her fist as full strength. It's a wonder I'm alive and not mentally challenged, though I can only attribute that to the dissociation. When I was 14, I came out to her as trans. She forced an enema on me to show me what it was like to get effed as a girl. And when the water was rushing out of me, she said, "You wanted to pee like a girl, right?" A few months later, she forcibly admitted me to a residential mental health facility to be rid of me for 6 months. When I came out of the facility, any evidence I had ever lived in the home was destroyed. They had erased me from their lives. My own siblings were taught to treat me like I wasn't their own. I was consistently told to call her aunt instead of mom like the other kids, and was told my siblings were no longer my siblings, they were now my cousins. She constantly threatened to have me sent away and regularly would come into my room to scream at me, punch me in the face, pull my hair, whatever she could do to torture me. She opened my windows on more than one occasion and told me to run away and that no one wanted me and no one ever would. She told my entire high school class that I had been sold as a toddler. I didn't find this one out until May of this year, 7 years after leaving high school. She saw to it my school life was just as much unbearable as my home life. When it became time to graduate, she stole all my graduation gifts, about $1,500, and her husband had started college funds for us. When I turned 18, I went to the bank and found out they had cleaned the account out and closed it a month earlier. There's more, but this is just what I remember. Some of my alters remember more, and there's a lot more that one of my child alters will never discuss at all. It's so hard to hear how many people just fall through the cracks, aren't noticed, aren't heard about. And it's not just the foster care. I mean, we see it right here. It's the relatives, the mom, the dad, the aunt, the whoever. Like, so many kids are taken advantage of. I don't necessarily have advice on how to help. It sounds like a lot of the people who are in place to help are doing a lot of the damage. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. If anyone out there has any advice, like if you have firsthand knowledge, like what could a random stranger do outside of adopting? I'm not in a position in my life to do that. But what could people do? Where could they go? What are some things that the world could do to help people in a situation like that? Genuinely, I would like to do something. Story 23. I wasn't a foster child, but my friend's daughter and son are. The whole story was awful and really made me question social services in Finland. I know people don't really believe this can happen, but let's remember that social workers are only people, and sometimes they are bad people. So my friend had a violent ex. We were talking about a person who broke her hand and essayed her regularly. So she got a daughter who she loves more than anything. She starts planning to leave and asks for help. I'm not saying she didn't make mistakes. She should have left the minute she became pregnant. But anyhow, during her plan, she gets her son. She doesn't have a house, so she finds a new man who takes them in. Mistake number 2, even though he is a great guy and they are still friends. Social worker tells her to cut contact with her violent ex or they take the children. Her ex keeps harassing her. Her social workers take her children. Should they have protected her? Taken her to a safe home, not punish her for what her ex did? I think so. She needed help, not punishment. So they tell her, do this and we give you your kids back. So she gets her own apartment, goes to therapy, finishes her education, nurse, and gets a job. All this time they're telling her, do also this and this and this. She jumps through all the hoops, the goalposts keep moving. Her children are around 3 and 4 now and staying with foster parents, who they call Mama and Papa. My friend is a mom, so they encourage her to be in touch, invite her to family events, call her even when kids are not around, give her as much time with her kids as possible. Her kids adore them. So in kindergarten, they find out the daughter has development problems. Mama and Papa are fine with this, but social workers want to move them to a house with more experience. Mama and Papa fight this because it's too big of a change for the kids, but the social worker has made up her mind. So the kids move to a family with more experience. They already have 2 kids and 1 foster child. Immediately they tell them they are now mom and dad, and their real mom is Anna. Kids are confused, of course. They take away things that are given to them by their real mom. They tell my friend how excited they are to have babies again. Babies? The foster mom tells my friend her kids won't be visiting as much as before because they'll need their holiday days. You won't get as much money then. They forget to invite her to parent-teacher meetings, birthdays, daughter's doctor's appointments, etc. So my friend hires a lawyer. For the first time, she reads what the social workers wrote about her, and it's all bullcrap. Mom is unstable and needs therapy. She tried to show she is making herself better after the abuse and was never unstable. Mom isn't able to study. She graduated. Mom can't keep a job. All this time, she had a job. It's just lies after lies after lies. Stuff like mom seems to be angry. First, social worker has no right to make assumptions, and she has never been rude or yelled at anyone. The lawyer says this as a piece of cake. So many laws have been broken. So the foster mom hears about the lawyer, and when picking up the daughter and son, starts yelling in my friend's front lawn in front of the neighbors and kids how she will not take her new babies away. She is a foster mom, and the point is to return my friend's kids back to her. They are not her babies. My friend informs social workers about this, but they don't really care. What she finds out is her violent ex also gets to meet their children, the one who started this whole crap. She is now worried about her children's safety. Then, finally, a miracle happens. Her social worker moves away. Ho ho ho! The female dog is gone. She gets a new one who has been amazing, really interested in doing her job and reuniting the family. My friend gets more home and overnight visits. Also, her lawyer finds out there hasn't been enough and notices her daughter is acting strange. They have a talk, and she finds out after they come back from visiting her, their host family takes away their toys as a punishment and forces to immediately take off their clothes because their mom is so dirty. She isn't. One of the cleanest people I know, even when going through all of this. Cleaning soothes her. Her son tells her he misses Mama and Papa too. So my friend arranges a day with them. All of them are happy about this. In the foster family, they are not allowed to talk about Mama and Papa. They have also told the kids they are not allowed to cry. My friend tells them that they are always allowed to show their emotions. She found out Mama and Papa have been sending them gifts that the host family have been giving to their own kids. So at the moment, there is light at the end of the tunnel. She is working on getting her kids back. Foster family won't allow her children to talk on the phone with her as a punishment. They are using what little time they have to be really difficult. For example, planning family vacations on the same time as their visitations, so my friend would look like the mean one. Luckily, she has her lawyer, who is crazy expensive but great. The lawyer got their dad only supervised visits, which is a real relief. My friend is worried how scarred her children will be after all of this, but at least she is finally getting them back. They are now 5 and 6 years old. Story 24. I could write a series of novels. I'm currently in the early stages of taking them to court. I won't get into the essay for obvious reasons, but a small collection of instances. After the first couple of months in the foster home, I was not allowed to take any food to school. Prior to that, my lunchbox was a bread bag. The school instituted a rule stopping kids from sharing their food because of me. My bedroom was in a barn outside the house, despite there being 2 spare rooms in the house. It was cleaned out days after we moved in. We were sleeping on couches in the lounge in the meantime, and was full of insects, spiders, and even a snake. There was a resident fruit bat in the main room of the barn. I was locked out of the house on a farm 20 kilometers from town during summer for up to 3 days at a time with no food or anything to drink. All my clothes, except what I was currently wearing at any given time, were locked in the house. When I ran away to a neighbor's, I was chased and beaten with a lump of wood by the family's youngest son after the neighbor brought me back. I was 12, he was 18. I have a number of scars from various assaults and even burns caused by them. The only time they'd clean the house was when they thought the Department of Human Services was going to show up. I recently found out through my files that DHS caught them out on this during a surprise visit in '98. And the worker also reported extensively the feral living conditions we were in. I was moved out of there in 2002 because the neighbors I mentioned above called the police the second time I went to their house. So DHS knew for 4 years and did nothing. I was given 1 toothbrush when we moved with the foster family. I was there for 7 years. We were also never provided soap or shampoo or conditioner, etc. And even better, were forced to bathe in the water that several of them had showers in. So by the time we got in there, it was brown and filthy. Story 25. In 7th grade, I had a friend named Kyrie, but nobody called her that. Everyone called her Cookie, because that's what she told everyone her name was. Teachers, kids, anyone. Hey Cookie, what's your real name? That is my real name. We only found out her real name was Kyrie after we had a sub in science who she didn't tell in time. She was a weirdo, but lots of fun to hang out with. She was into anime and came to school cosplaying every once in a while. She also likes MLP and Teen Titans. We had lots in common and got along great. About 3 weeks before the school year ended, she disappeared, like nobody knew where she went. I kind of forgot about her for a couple of years, and then I have one of those moments where a random thing hits you out of nowhere. I ask some friends, and they tell me all the horror stories about the awful crap her dad did to her. She disappeared because CPS finally found out and yanked her out. I stumbled across her Instagram on accident a while back. I don't know if I can say what it is, but it's a pun revolving around cookies and weed. Turns out CPS was even worse for her. She was essayed semi-regularly by other kids. Now she's living with a sugar daddy who treats her like crap but gives her a place to live. She's only 16, by the way. I feel that's important to note. Story 26. I was in foster care for 13 years. My mom was a drug addict and my dad was a drunk and druggie. I remember being 6 and we had just moved from my first ever foster home where I'd lived for 2 years. And the lady I moved in with, she got mad at me and threw me off her lap and onto the floor telling me that when I was done being a baby, then we could talk like adults. She also used to put me in ice cold showers whenever I acted up or cried. She would lock me in the basement and I wasn't allowed out of my room during the night. So if I had to go to the bathroom, she made me go in a bucket. There were also 3 bathrooms in the house, but I was only allowed to use the basement one because she was afraid I would pee on the seat. One time I got sick and threw up, and she made me drink vinegar, and when I threw up again, she hit me. She used to push me down the stairs, and I had lived there till I was 8. Another home I lived at after that was even worse. I had lived with 2 other foster girls, and I remember one time being 9 or 10, and I'd been playing with my toys too loud. And I'd woken up her real son, and she pulled me by the hair and made me go into the cold cellar. I remember crying and apologizing, saying I would stop and play with something else because it was cold and it was winter. I guess my crying was bothering her son that he went and grabbed 2 cups, one of cold water and the other of ice, and dumped it all over me. Other times she would grab me or the other girls by our jaws and step on our toes. And she wasn't a small woman by any means, so it hurt. And she would yell how worthless we were at 9 years old. We were called nasty, nasty names. We were called fat, and none of us were even fat or even liking boys in that way yet. She would lock us outside in the winter with just our socks and jeans and long sleeves, and we would have to freeze till she thought we should come back in. She would also hit us with the fly swatter when she was mad. Another time I remember being 11 years old, and we had this one girl move in, and this foster mom had just allowed for this girl to attack me. I had just come out of my room to see if I could have a snack, and when I noticed that no one was around, I found it weird, but I was about to go back to my room when she just came out of nowhere and just attacked me and dragged me into the bathroom. She sat down on me and I couldn't breathe. She was just going at me, and I still have no idea why this happened. But she was later moved within a few weeks, and the 3 other girls I were beaten daily by, this foster mom included. We were kept home quite often because we had bruises. Sometimes she was really nice, but then she was like this. Story 27. I was fostered from the ages of 3 to 12 by the most amazing couple. They looked after myself and my 2 sisters like we were their own. After a horribly neglectful and abusive childhood, they taught us what it was like to be loved, respected, and gave us morals. We moved back to my bio dad's when I was 12. At 15, I was kicked out of his house. His wife fostered us too, but the money dried up. I then went into a girls' home. I've got so many stories of that place, some terrifying, some downright cruel. Some really good memories too. One that sticks out for me though is this. Girls went in and out of the girls' home regularly, all with their own tragic stories, but there was this one girl in particular. I'll call her Eve. The first time I saw Eve, she didn't speak, but had that telltale, haunted look most of the girls had. A quick glance at her arms, and you could see dozens and dozens of scars running up her forearms, some thin and silvery, others deep, angry and purple. You get to learn certain tells of abuse, and cut up arms usually mean childhood essay. Most of us bonded in there. Our connection was founded on mutual pain and different issues we had because of our childhoods. This meant lots of drinking and drug taking and new girls to do it with. We were also fiercely protective of each other. One night I woke up around 2 in the morning, feeling like something was off. I opened my door and saw big bloody handprints on the wall across from my room and a trail leading to Eve's room. Instantly concerned, I ran into her room, and what greeted me is what I'd imagine a murder scene would look like. There was blood everywhere, the ceiling, over the walls, pools of it on the ground. I instantly knew Eve had self-harmed again, so I ran to the staff that worked there to see if she was okay. They told me she left. They couldn't stop her. They couldn't leave to find her. All they could do was ring the police. I then went to the other girls' rooms, told them what happened, and we decided to leave and look after her. Now the home had a lockdown from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Only staff had the key to the door. I guess they felt a bit hopeless, but they allowed us to leave. There was some disciplinary action taken later against the staff and the girls for it. We left. We went to our all-known hangout spots. After an hour or two, we found her, drinking and taking drugs and still bleeding with lads who clearly were taking advantage. I begged her to leave and to go to the hospital, but she refused to go. So I stayed with her, bandaged up her arms as best as I could using my t-shirt, and just minded her for the rest of the night, till I finally convinced her to come back to the home. The staff rang her an ambulance, and I went upstairs, cleaned up the blood as best as I could, and went to bed. That's one of so many stories I have, to the shock of seeing so much blood is not something I'll forget ever. Story 28. I've only been in foster care once, and it wasn't as bad as some of the other stories here. All my life, I've been in and out of social services systems. Luckily, I usually went and stayed with various loving family members until my mom got clean or whatever. The true horror came from living with my mom, though. All my life, she had really weird boyfriends. One pinned me to a counter and held a gun in my face when I was 10. When I was 15, another one of her boyfriends had a tendency to call me a really pretty girl while he got drunk on our couch. My mom used to get super paranoid when she was on drugs. She'd convince my younger siblings to turn on me and tell them that people were coming into our house and watching us. The entire year of me being 14 to 15 was me caring for my 3 younger siblings. I got them to school. I bought as much groceries as I could. I tried to buy them warm clothes for winter. My life really sucked when I lived with my mom, and I'm glad I managed to get out pretty okay. I'm sorry if this isn't really what you guys were looking for, but I thought I'd share anyways. Story 29. Mine was not horrifying really, just not good. I was sent to foster care from when I was 2 until I was 12, and I lived with 5 different families. I was never a bad kid. The reason I kept getting shuffled is because couples would foster me with the hopes of adoption, and my birth mom kept fighting for custody. I'm glad she did though. My birth mom is awesome. Long story. So here's the bad. 1, I only owned clothes and wore a personal stuffed animal that my mom made for me. Everything was moved in black garbage bags. 2, keep in mind, I started when I was 2. So the first couple families to send me away was super confusing because I always thought I was just going for a little trip or a visit, not that I was moving to a totally new family. I also always thought they loved me. Kids are so naive. 3. They weren't allowed to hit me, and I was inspected by child services, so people would find other ways that didn't leave marks. 4. My third family would watch Roadhouse in front of me, but my fourth family was super religious, so that was a shock to be told that Beetlejuice the cartoon was pagan and banned. They also made me go to church summer camp where I was a soldier of Christ and marched with a flag with a cross painted on my face. I was 8. 5. Fourth family made me pray every night, say grace, go to Bible studies, and if I was in trouble, I had to write on paper hundreds of times my apologies to God. None of my previous families were religious, so this really freaked me out. 6. I had 6 true brothers and sisters, all from the same parents. Again, long story, and sometimes I would be put in the house with 1 or 2 of them, and then we would be separated again, and this was really distressing to me. 7. I had to go to state-mandated mental therapy from when I was 2 until I was 16, when I could opt out. This, of course, led to me being diagnosed with everything these a-holes could stick to a kid, which gave me a really bad self-esteem, as I was convinced I had 2 disorders and wouldn't amount to anything. Now, the state health system's trying to do the same thing to my 5-year-old, and I'm effing fighting it with everything I've got. I was diagnosed with ADHD, ODD, and dissociative identity disorder, and some crap they call touching trouble, which I guess is inappropriate affection. I pretty much thought I was a leper, didn't trust anyone or anything, and never tried. It wasn't until my mid-20s that I adopted a new mindset for I rejected their diagnosis, and now I have an awesome life. Story 30. I went into foster care around 4 years old with my sister, who's 5 years old. The first one was horrible. The girl living there was a few years older. She used to force us to do things we didn't want to do and tell us, if you don't, I'll have my grandpa shoot you with his gun. At that age, you tend to believe anything. From there, we went to the second foster care. This one was a lot worse. It was a trashy home with a mom, dad, and 2 brothers. Youngest, not too much older, and used to threaten he would kill us as well. The third and final foster care was the best one out there. Wonderful family of mom, dad, 2 sons and daughter, if I remember correctly. They all were so nice to us. We didn't stay there long. I remember the foster parents told us they had a surprise for us for Christmas. We thought we were getting kittens, lol. We get a knock on the door, and it was my dad and his new girlfriend there to pick us up for good. Some backstory, my mom was dealing with mental illness and could not care for us, and my dad was an alcoholic who was in AA and sober house. He will always be my biggest hero. He got his life together in a year and a half and fought to get his daughters back. 25 years later, he still hasn't had a single drop of alcohol. My foster care experience turned out to be a very happy ending. Story 31. Finally, something I have experience with. 1. To watch TV, I had to sit on the dining room floor and couldn't sit with the family over in the living room. And if I crossed the line from the linoleum to carpet, I'd be locked in my room without dinner. 2. One Christmas, the family's own son got the exact gifts I asked for. Had to sit there and watch him open them and express his happiness. 3. Another year for Christmas, the family didn't want me there, so I was sent to a temporary house for the holidays. Really sucked knowing that they didn't want me around, and even sadder, the state was fine with it. 4. One family would punish us by having us hold our arms out and would be disciplined with a stick if our arms dropped. 5. Got lice at school, and instead of the family spending money on lice remover, they used a Lysol drain cleaner on my head. Burned like heck. 6. Having your birthday forgotten or trying to pretend it's not Father's or Mother's Day. Story 32. After reading other people's stories, I've decided to share my experience. However, this is my first time sharing it outside of just my father, and I don't want to go into much detail. Also, sorry for any poor spelling or grammar. I'm typing this on my phone at 3 a.m. I was essayed when I was 7-ish by the middle child of the foster family my sister and I were staying with. At the time, he was questioning his sexuality and decided to experiment using me. Luckily, for the longest time, I had little memory of it growing up, but in the past 5 or so years, I started remembering more and more of those memories. Since then, I kept it a secret because I was unsure of the validity of my memories, until a recent conversation between my father and I, where he basically told me that I did tell him about the essay while I was in foster care, and that it prompted him to sober up and fight to get us back. What bothers me the most is upon hearing the news, my father brought the issue up with CPS, but they didn't believe him, as he was an alcoholic at the time. Story 33. Need to apologize beforehand because words are hard and my brain isn't coherent even to myself. My problem wasn't with the foster family that took me in. It was the sister of the siblings that came into the home through respite care. The program that I was allowed to live there until I turned 21. I had horribly autistic and antisocial tendencies, but I loved to be around other people that wanted to be around me, even if it meant I would do nothing but sit there and watch. Now that sister, we'll call her M, loved attention. From anyone, doesn't matter who. I was placed in charge of watching them whenever they would come over because I was home anyways. I would just sit and listen to anything M would say and watch whatever she wanted to watch. Her brother would just sit in the corner and play with Legos. This one time though, M wanted to watch a R-rated movie, and for the first time ever, I told her no. I should mention here that I was 20, M was 10, and her brother 8, and they have been coming over for years. Later that day, M wanted to play hide and seek. Her brother lost the rock, paper, scissors wager and was first to seek. I went to hide in the coat closet soon after M shows up and squeezes on in because there are no better spots. The next day, I'm called to have a meeting with the foster parent. M told them that while we were hiding, I felt her up. I don't know about where you are from, but around here, foster folks are mandated reporters. I was given 2 options later that day. Leave then and there, they'll send my things to my biological mother, or wait for the cops to show up to arrest me for child SA. Until that day, I never knew what it was like to sleep under a bridge. Now, I do. Story 34. Little late to the party, but the foster home I was in as a child had an obscene amount of children. They had 2 adults that weren't married, and they each got children of their own as their house was on 2 lots, so they claimed 2 addresses. So there was at least 10 children there. At night, we would put on pull-ups immediately after dinner, which was usually minimal as the good food was for adults around 6:30, and locked in a room until around 9 a.m. in the morning. We were all potty trained. If we leaked through our pull-up, we didn't get let out until after breakfast, and it was fed to the other children. And if there was nothing left, that was it. If we were good, we got to sleep in the room of the one biological child the woman had, but we slept on her floor with a receiving blanket. The woman always told me she hated me because I had the hair of the devil's idiot, as I was the only blonde girl, as my sister is half Asian and my little brother was a boy. I was 4. My grandma and grandpa got them shut down. They moved across the Mississippi River to the Hennepin County and got a new license. Story 35. I was a teenager when my family hosted foster kids. It was many years ago, so back then foster was mostly kids whose parents were abusive. We had many good foster kids who were happy to stay at our house, but one little girl I will never forget. She was 7 years old, and when she arrived, she didn't know how to do anything by herself. The first night, my mom asked me to show her how to take a shower. 15-year-old got the kid's permission to come in the bathroom and tell her what to do. Now, legally, my mom was not supposed to tell me too much about the girl's history, so I didn't know what I was getting into. I go into the bathroom and get the water a safe temperature for her, and while I'm doing so, she starts taking off her clothes. She gets her head caught in her shirt, so I go to help her, and that's when I see something that will haunt me forever. This 7-year-old little girl had big black, purple, and yellow bruises up and down her back, literally from head to toe. Teenage me was barely able to hide my shock and sadness. I pulled my crap together, helped her into the shower, and showed her how to use the soap. Then while she was rinsing, I excused myself and stepped into the hallway and closed the door. That's when I broke into tears, not only for this little girl, but for the realization that we live in a world where someone could hurt a child like this. My mom was waiting outside the bathroom because she knew what I would see. It was then that she told me that this girl and her siblings were taken away because the dad would hold them by the hair over the stairwell and beat them with a belt. The little girl tried her hardest to be a normal kid, but the damage was already done. At school and at home, she would flip her crap and get violent, hurting both herself and others. After 4 months, my mom had to get Children's Aid to take her somewhere else because she was too damaged to live with my family. It was the first time my mom ever had to give up. If anyone is interested, I can also tell the tale of how my mom quit or was fired from fostering. My mom died 2 years ago, and this makes me tear up just typing this. Story 37. One I have firsthand experience of. A whole year with one family that was almost nothing but a living nightmare. The mom and dad were the kind to adopt kids for the cash of it, and to make it more profitable, they skimped everywhere they could on the kids. No matter how many kids were there at the time, they would force us to share the same bathwater. At peak, there were 7 kids, including myself, that had to share the same bathwater and towels. The father was a downright abusive a-hole. The mother, I remember, occasionally stuck the head of one of the other kids in her butt cheeks. She was easily 350 pounds and farted directly on it and laughed. Anytime we would go to one restaurant, they would give cornbread with every dish, so the mother went around and licked all the powdered sugar off the tops of our cornbread and told us to eat it. We were not allowed much in the way of toys, because they took up too much space. Anytime the caseworkers would show up, they would place unused toys all over the place and act like all the kids were using them. Anytime my sister and I went to visit our mom and sometimes dad and they gave us toys, the parents would confiscate them and throw them away. This is excluding all of the beating, the yelling, the mental torment, some of which I literally cannot remember due to the PTSD. The parents had 3 levels of belt whipping. Keep in mind, belt whipping was against the law for foster kids at that time. Level 1 made your butt hurt for a few hours, but no major harm done. Level 2 left bruises, and it made it hard to sit down for a couple of days. Level 3, you were bleeding, and you had an inability to put all of your weight down when you sat for about a week, and they would punish you for mundane crap sometimes. My sister and I were with that family for a year. Luckily, after a 2-year foster care experience, my mother got my sister and I back, and this was about 11 years ago now. As far as I know, that family still adopts and fosters children and still beats them senseless. I had other bad experiences in the foster care system because I was in it for a whole year previous to this mentioned family, but this family was literal torture. Because of that family and what they did to me and my sister, I unintentionally repressed almost every memory from before I was 10 and have little recollection of my childhood. Story 38. My parents took in foster children when I was really young. The ones I remember, N. He was a teenager and he stole money from my parents, but he was always nice to me. He ended up in prison. My dad kept in touch with him. G. Also a troubled teenage boy, but never stole or otherwise did anything bad that I knew of while with us. I had good memories of him and was surprised he also ended up in prison with very serious charges. Maintained contact with my dad. D. A teenage girl that I did not get along well with. My parents didn't really share background stories because I was too young, but she was very angry all the time. I'm sure she had a reason to be, but she stole my grandma's jewelry and ran away. I'm not sure what happened to her. B. And the kids. This was a sibling group that came in that I remember fondly, other than catching lice. The older sister was maybe 11, and she clearly was the caretaker for 3 younger ones, including an infant. None ever stayed very long. I don't know if we were a transitional house or what. They made me keenly aware of how lucky I was to have my parents. I always wonder what ended up happening to B and the kids. Story 39. Foster home didn't have any. She was an amazing woman, just couldn't care for me and my sisters after her mother got sick. Second foster home. I was fed apple cinnamon oatmeal for every meal. There are no guidelines or laws on what we ate, so as long as we ate, I still can't stand it. We were forced to work on the farm. This included feeding the animals, even though I was only 4 or 5 and my sisters were even younger. I ended up getting chased by a goat, and I now have a lifelong fear of them. My sister was beat daily, and she was 18 months old. We were finally removed from the foster mother, pushed into her corner of the wooden table, fractured her skull, and sent her to the bed with a bottle of chocolate milk instead of taking her to the hospital, leaving her with permanent brain damage. Third home. My youngest sister at the time was SA'd by their oldest son. She wasn't even a year old. He was 32. I was severely neglected, pushed away by the family, and emotionally abused. They took care of us physically, but refused to take care of our mental and emotional health as well. As a result of my 3-year stay in foster care, I had severe abandonment issues, depression, and low self-esteem. It's taken over 20 years to be semi-confident, but I doubt I'll be anything that I could have been. My second sister is severely unstable and has a whole host of mental issues, but she's an adult now and there isn't anything I can do. My middle sister doesn't know she was SA'd, and I plan to keep it that way. She was the least affected out of all of us. She's doing really well, and I love seeing her blossom. My 2 baby sisters never had to deal with it, and I can see the drastic change in their life compared to where I was at their ages. Foster care doesn't help, it just creates more issues for the families to deal with. Once you're in foster care, the percentage that your children will be a part of the system goes up too. It creates a cycle, and the most of the time, the poorest of them have to bear the brunt of the corrupt system. For me, it's a feeling of failure. I should have protected my sisters better. Story 40. Walking in the door after school to be told by my foster parent that my big brother from the Big Brother program, who was like a father to me, had died of a heart attack. Was left there for around 45 minutes by myself crying. Another foster home, I was kept in the bottom floor of the house with all the other foster kids while the biological kids and the rest of the family lived upstairs. They had a big screen TV, 2 computers, and upscale furniture. Downstairs, we had a 14-inch TV to watch in the storage room where they kept spare beds and other stuff. We only got to go upstairs for dinner and to do chores. Roomed with a foster brother who tried to kill his mother by pushing her into traffic on one of their visits. Come home from school one day to find no one home and the door locked. catch 2 buses to go see them. I called a family member who called the foster parents, get called a liar by my family because my foster parents told them they were home all day, get threatened and almost punched by biological kid in front of foster parent, and I got blamed for it, get kicked out of foster home after being told I was a pot dealer, even though I only smoked it to feel better, woke up in the middle of the night to my foster brother punching me in the face before being knocked out, tried to tell the foster parent, but he was a favorite in the house and I was new, so it got swept under the rug. Go to new foster home, get phone stolen from foster brother on the first night, house has locks on all doors. Foster father tells me to clean my room or he won't give me a ride to work. I take the bus to work. Come home to my room cleaned out and the cops being called because I had a weed paraphernalia in my room. These things aren't really that terrible, and I probably blocked out most of the really bad stuff. I guess the worst thing was just feeling completely alone in the world. Having gone through 7 different homes, it also sucked to not be able to develop any home base with any long-term friend groups. I was pretty much a drifter. You can only start over so often before you give up on some parts of life. Oh well. Thanks for reading. Story 41. My mom was in foster care in Vietnam until, I guess, foster grandparents adopted her, thinking she was an American hybrid since she's very pale. Turns out she wasn't, and which I kind of doubt, and want to have her take a DNA ancestry test. They then proceeded to adopt another, who was like half African American and half Vietnamese. They needed an American child in order to immigrate from Vietnam to the United States legally, and needed a sponsor, which is what I was told. This was during/right after the Vietnam War. Before my mom was adopted by my grandparents, she said she would always be beat for no reason even after doing her painstaking chores for the current foster parents. Did great in school, but once she got to America, with my grandparents, she couldn't go to school due to the language barrier. I believe she was 14 when she arrived. Went straight to work to pay house bills for grandparents. I feel bad because she did great in school over in Vietnam, but that career ended simply due to language. Also, my grandparents are cheap crap. They only adopted the 2, mom and half American uncle, just to get to America. When my grandpa died and we inherited money from him, my mom somehow got baited into signing something that redirected all of that money back to my grandma. Grandma proceeded to gamble over $80,000 away and became bankrupt, sold the house, and I don't even know where she is now. My grandpa also kind of beat the crap out of me when I was like 2. Okay, I got sidetracked a lot. Too long, didn't read. Mom was in an abusive foster care system in Vietnam. Mom got adopted, but turns out she wasn't an American. So scumbag grandparents adopted another who was. Got to America via sponsor. Mom couldn't go to school in America due to the language barrier, so no big career for her. Grandpa died, then grandma stole money from my mom's inheritance and gambled it all away. On the bright side, my other uncle, dad's side, sponsored their trip to America, and when they came, that's how my parents met. Dad was living at my uncle's house for the time being. That is how my brother popped out, then me, except I wasn't the gender they were expecting. Story 42. In 1 year between the ages of 12 and 13, I was in a home with 12 other boys. Here's a short list of some of the most crappy things. Sprayed in the eyes with bear spray, stronger than pepper spray by the way, bitten by an angry 9-year-old dozens of times, fed 0 meals at home, subsisting only on school lunch, got head lice for months because they wouldn't buy treatments, instead used undiluted chlorine bleach, didn't work, beaten with a shovel. But the worst was when I was covered in strawberry milk. The foster mother worked in a high school cafeteria. She brought home the day-old milk cartons instead of buying us milk, so she could have a big screen TV. Rarely was this milk soured, and we got chocolate milk as a nice treat. One day she brought home several crates of strawberry milk, which we had never had. It was delicious, and I drank many cartons to ease my hunger pains. For whatever reason, the older boys decided to have a milk fight, hurling cartons of milk at each other like baseballs until they exploded, basting our entire wing of the house in sticky milk. I was trying to sleep because I had to go to school in the morning. They then decided to wake up everyone not participating by pouring strawberry milk on them in their sleep. I promptly went to the foster parents' room, conveniently at the other end of the house, and tried to explain the situation. Through a locked door, they told me to go away. I cleaned up my bed, then showered and went back to sleep. Except they had poised several open cartons on top of the door, so they spilled everywhere as I went back in my room. Sad and angry, I went to pound on the foster parents' door again. They still did not listen. Finally, after 3 hours of pink dairy shenanigans, the older boys made enough noise to draw the attention of the foster parents. When they saw the scene, strawberry milk literally dripping from every surface, their anger was immeasurable. How dare we waste such a special treat on this outrageous behavior? The culprits must be punished. Who did they blame? Me, the only person who tried to get their attention by tearfully begging for help. And Chris, who had Down syndrome and was always perfectly behaved and slept through the whole thing. Chris and I were forced to clean the entire wing of the house, 6 bedrooms, 14 beds, a long hallway, and a bathroom. It took about 7 hours all throughout the night. Then I had to go to attend 5th grade in 1 hour. The next day, they apologized for getting it wrong with a simple, "I'm sorry." They punished the boys responsible by taking away their Nintendo for 1 day. Chris and I received nothing else. That night, I tried to unalive myself by inhaling cleaning chemicals out of a bucket. It didn't work, and I cried myself to sleep. Strawberry milk is still one of my favorite drinks, so I have that, I guess. LOL. Story 43. I'll start off with the fact that I had multiple medical problems, one of which was a G-tube. For those who don't know, it's a tube that goes into your stomach. While in foster care, I went to school and my tube leaked onto my shirt. It's a common occurrence that I have zero control of. The first time it happened while living with her, the school called and had her bring me new clothes. She was so embarrassed and angry with me for putting her through something so awful. So she decided to take me to a doctor and have it taken out. This doctor decided a hole in my stomach that had been there for 10 years would just close on its own. This hole went into my stomach, leaking stomach acid and all. She made me lay on the couch and I was not allowed to eat. When I tried to call my attorney, she wouldn't let me. My sister was put in the same home with me. The lady would starve her as well, try to feed her spoiled, moldy food, and beat her and the other kids. Finally, our attorney showed up and had us removed. I was taken to a real doctor and had to have the surgery to repair the damage done. The worst part? The lady got away with it. Story 44. I was in and out of foster homes for most of my childhood. Every time my bio mother went to rehab, so at least every couple of years. The worst one was when I was 8. The husband would whip the kids for entertainment. I tried to be a tough little female dog and I got it pretty bad. Then wound up getting infected, and the wife eventually took pity on me when I started getting really sick and brought me to the hospital. The second worst was a horribly mean old lady. If you didn't do what she wanted fast enough, she would send her dog after you. Granted, the dog wouldn't actually bite, she would just tear your clothes up, but I wasn't even in school yet, so I was under 6 and it terrified me. There was also the government facilities. I guess it would be like a group home. The first one I was in wasn't too bad. There was lots of unwanted, intimate contact, but I was coming from a home where I was abused by my bio mother's friends, so it didn't bother me much. The second one I was in was harsher because it was for the bad kids. We were locked in at night, and if you had to go to the bathroom, it was tricky because if you just went on the floor or in the bed, then you weren't allowed out in the yard for recreation. To end on a positive note, I did have one magnificent foster mother. She saved my life, like literally. I came to her during my self-harm phase. I was anorexic, hurting myself. She was so effing nice and supportive. She taught me all the household stuff, gardening, cooking, sewing. We would do lots of crafty stuff together. She was so patient. She helped me get over my fear of dogs and start loving them because she had dogs that were as great as her. She also got me my first doll and a few others from the same collection. I was a little old for dolls, but I effing loved that thing. She passed away when my youngest was around 4, but I'm glad my 2 kids got to know her a bit. She was with me for my daughter's birth, and they called her Mamir. I still consider her my mom, and I'm 36. Edited to add after reading some others, I did not include the stuff that was bad but was worse or the same at home. Food and clothing and toys were short everywhere, but I didn't have any of that at home either, so to me it was normal at the time. I was eating treats or grass and leaves off the bush outside our kitchen, so going to a foster home where they would still feed you the minimal amount for survival was kind of a step up. It was messed up, but it did get me involved in a food bank type charity and the Big Sister program. I wanted to foster and adopt, but my husband is done with kids, so unfortunately that didn't happen. Story 45. Removed from my mother in a cop car. Handled like I was under arrest. Caseworkers angry that I was there and ruined their night. Called me a spoiled little girl because I was crying so much. I was removed due to physical abuse. Lack of beds for teenagers in my city. Dumped on a locked mental ward for 3 months until one opened up. No phone calls, visits, no going outdoors. Everyone else on that ward with me was a foster kid in the same position. Heavy use of chemical restraints, just abusive staff. Taken to a foster home, there was 6 beds in a garage. Food under lock and key. Taken to another where foster mother chain smoked around us all day long, blowing smoke in our faces. Everyone there has asthma and breathing issues. She tried to tell me I was not allowed to contact my caseworker. I stated my foster child bill of rights to her, taken to another foster home on my birthday, better than the others. Deeply homophobic though. Foster mom talked a lot about homos deserving AIDS. Foster mom cornered a little 8-year-old girl, slammed her hands on the wall inches from the girl's face, telling her off for wetting the bed. She was there due to SA. Finally returned to my mother. She was emboldened because she knew I would never tell on her again. Things got worse and worse and worse until she overdosed and died. I have spent probably 50 grand on therapy for PTSD. F foster care, F CPS, F this disconnected society where people call a bunch of barely schooled desk jockeys to take care of children rather than stepping up and being a positive force in those kids' lives. F Republicans who constantly vote through measures that underfund social welfare programs and birth control access. And F all the people on Reddit shrieking, "You should call CPS" for the tiniest little misstep on a parent's part. You people are the reason caseworkers burn out and kids die in foster homes because the system was too bogged down to check on them by you. Story 46. I have witnessed a horrifying war that caused me to lose a beloved brother and sister. I have seen such physical, verbal, and SA that would make those on death row cringe with disgust. I know of a punishing violence that sentences a helpless infant to a life without the ability to talk, walk, or move anything below his neck ever again. I have seen what it means to be alone in this world, with no family, no love, and no hope. Yet, my life so far has been nothing short of wonderful, incredible, and completely fulfilling. You see, I have experienced all these horrors through the innocent eyes of many foster families that my family has cared for since I was 3 years old. I was never in the foster care program. However, I am not ignorant to its horrors. While the aforementioned experiences occurred to the children prior to entering the system, I have seen conduct, behavior, and treatment by representatives of the system equally as disgusting. Being an organization designed to help children and families, I have seen foster care operate in a counterintuitive manner. I am very proud to be a part of the system to provide these kids with a loving family and attempt to affect positive change in their lives. However, I am often disappointed in the way the system functions. Story 47. I was in the foster care system when my mom almost died during childbirth. For 6 months, my sister and I were moved around from home to home. The first night was the most vivid memory. I remember getting pulled out of bed by strangers and put in a car, then being dropped off at some house a few hours later. They explained nothing, just said, "You're going to stay here a while." This was the early 70s, so kids were more in the way and handled than nurtured. I remember sitting on the bedroom floor, playing a game called Don't Break the Ice, until a kid, his room, came up and pushed me away from his toy and told me not to touch his stuff. His mom came in, saw what was going on, and beat me for playing with her son's toys. Being from an abusive family, I was used to this, so I just sat on the bed until I was told to go to bed. The next morning, I got beaten, while naked, for wrapping the soap in a washcloth so I could wash myself in the tub. I thought it was a clever way to wash, but my new mom didn't. That night, my sister got beat for wiping spaghetti sauce off her face with a piece of bread, then eating the bread. She was weird, but didn't deserve a beating. This went on until the foster care people came to check on us. My sister, being older, didn't keep her mouth shut like we were told, so we were immediately removed. This process went on and on for a few months, house to house, beating to beating. My sister was SA'd a few times. We finally landed in separate homes for a week, then we went to see my mom in the hospital. My aunt, mom's friend, was there and said we were going to a new home with my mom. I had completely shut down by then. My vivid memories from the first year back home are gone, so the rest is my mom's account. She said she had to bribe me with candy to sit with her for about a year before I started talking to her and acting like a normal kid again. My sister is still super effed up about all of this. She dated mentally, not physically, abusive men all her life and is still married to an a-hole. She's about 150 pounds overweight because she still eats her feelings, and it kills me that I couldn't protect her from all of this. I learned to cope, but she never did. So that's the foster care system from the 70s, kids. Story 48. Well, my memory is kinda crappy. Maybe it's from the mysterious flat part of my head I probably got from my mom, but I'll try to explain. So when I was around 5, my mom burned me with boiling hot water over me peeing in an inflatable bed I had. I've gotten burns all around my legs, butt, and other spots on my body. Sometime after that, I woken up to her not being in the house, and my other siblings weren't there either. I began to panic and went outside looking for her. We lived in an apartment complex, by the way, walking all around the outside parking lot areas in my underwear crying, "I want my mama," until my neighbor spotted me and brought me into her place where I think she called the police. I remember having to strip and take pictures for the police and being in the hospital for a while until I was sent into a foster home. My dad got in custody of me and I ended up staying with him. I kind of went through some abuse with him too, him making me sit on the toilet for hours for soiling myself being one of the punishments, until my stepmom came in and took me out of there. That's how we all started living together. According to her, I couldn't even talk at this point. The part that gives me chills is that I went out to look for her, even though she did that to me, and the mental scars I've gotten from that time wasn't from the physical abuse, but was from being left alone like that. I never got any therapy whatsoever, so I'm pretty screwed up, probably have borderline personality disorder. Not only that, but anything could have gone wrong. I could have ended up getting kidnapped and have who knows what done to me. I could have stayed with her and suffered from abuse my whole life or been killed. My life is so screwed up, and I never got any help for it. My stepmom went away, which drove me into a PTSD episode that left me extremely depressed my 11th grade year. I'm constantly feeling like my friends are going to leave me. My dad is selfish and mostly cares about himself. It's pretty understandable why I have self-unaliving thoughts. It feels like I can't really go down a better path until I graduate this year and move out of my dad's house. Story 49. UK foster system. Home number 1. 6-year-old full-on church nuts. Baptized against my will, had a nursery rhyme book that was censored, old woman in a shoe, whipped them all soundly and sent them to bed, whipped was crossed out and replaced with kissed. Was a pawn and the mother, netting a side piece with money. Remember sharing a bed with a 60-year-old woman on holiday at a beach somewhere when she had an attack of conscience, believing she had angered God. Side piece slept on the put-up made for me. What would have happened if I hadn't? 27 years on, I still remember this man vividly. Spent a lot of time with him in posh restaurants, football machines, etc. After that holiday, I never saw him again. He was only my friend, as I was never allowed to leave the house, visit anyone who may want to be friends with me. General emotional neglect, although was physically well cared for. Never allowed to watch TV, didn't own any video games, etc. Read the King James Bible cover to cover twice. Borrowed Terry Pratchett Discworld series from the library. Halfway through the second book, I am forced to return that blasphemous book. Family was going away to church camp. We argued. I didn't really want to go, so I got shipped off to another home. Home number 2. 10-year-old evil older bio kid. Absolute bully. Would beat me and scream and cry to get her own way. Was treated like a stray dog and kind of ignored. Parents were okay though. Do remember getting into a prestigious grammar school. Would only be given €1 dinner money, which would get me into a sniff in the canteen and a glass of water. Turned to stealing change from other kids' blazers to eat dinner. Got caught, got kicked out. Then I was ashamed of the family and got moved on. Home number 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Temporary group homes being shuffled around until I turned 16 and just walked away. I do remember one, I don't know when, but I remember the oldest accidentally spoiling the twist at the end of The Sixth Sense that she had just been to see at the movie theaters. So, around 1999? This was the nicest family I met. 4 girls and me, all fostered and whole by a lady named Glynn, who collected pot Westie dogs. Even though by this time I was a butthole, she always had the patience and made me feel like one of the family. I remember the youngest girl, Rosie, I think, who I simply adored. She was the shortest term best friend I ever met, but I still remember her. At the most difficult time in my life, this lady and her fostered girls helped me flourish and gain confidence. I also met a girl at school who would become my first ever girlfriend, and to this day, 20 years on, I still have a photo of us together and a letter she sent me, although I can't remember her real name. After 10 years of being passed along and neglected or made to feel unwanted in one form or another, this one family had the most effect on me, and I was only there for under 6 months. I would love to be able to thank them. I have never spoken to anyone, even my wife, about my time and care, so thank you all for listening. Applied for the Navy and never looked back. Unrelated story, I remember having to have my CO sign my passport application as I was under 18 and had no one else to sign it for me. That was a little depressing. Turns out I wouldn't cut the Navy long term. Problems with authority and being able to relate as a member of a team. After a minimum term of 2 years, I PVR'd and got roughly 11,000 short-term/agency jobs to feed myself. Story 50. I was a part of the NC foster care system pretty much my entire childhood. It's been one of the most effed up experiences of my life, and oddly, one of the biggest blessings. My bio mom was very poor and wrote bad checks to feed us, and her parents refused to offer any sort of financial help. because two of her kids were half black, my sister and I. Well, when the law caught up with my mom, her parents took custody of all my white sister, but my other sister and I were sent into foster care. I was 2 and she was 3. Welcome to the South of the 90s and today. The social services officer promised we would be placed together and always know each other, which lasted about 2 years. Afterwards, she got lucky and was adopted permanently. We lived in a very tiny town, so I still saw her sometimes and briefly got to meet the family that took her from me. But I spent the next 11 years shuffling between 23 different foster homes across the state. 4 of those homes had men who essayed me, the worst of which was a dude in his 20s or 30s living with his mom, my foster mom. In this home, I was only allowed to eat at school. I was allowed 1 bowl of cereal on the weekends, and sometimes the son would put a pill in the cereal that made me drowsy, and I would wake up later undressed in his bed. This was first grade, and I didn't live there very long, perhaps 5 or 6 months before he was caught. Because this was the second essay, the system stipulated that I had to be placed in a home as an only child, which of course never happened. I was still placed in homes with older men, and unfortunately the cycle was repeated. You know what they don't tell you is how graceless the transitions are from one home to another. Many times I would only know I was leaving a family because my social worker shows up, or maybe I come home and my bags are packed for me. I remember being in 2nd grade and one of my family transitions was simply done at school. Old foster mom dropped me off at school, and new foster mom picked me up after school. I'll never forget getting into her red Toyota and just plopping down on the seat and obviously saying, "Hi mom, where do we live?" She cried the entire trip to my new home. I liked that family. By the time 3rd grade hit, I was becoming a problem child. Food insecurities were making me hoard food, and I, again, had an intimate encounter with an older male in the home. So they had to move me, and the choice they made was an all-boys group home. To this day, I'll never understand their reasoning for placing a S.A.'d 3rd grader into a camp full of sexual predators and delinquents. I don't need to explain the rest of that story, but I thought it was cool that I got to skip the 3rd grade. Another 15 or so homes later, my social worker tells me that she's found the perfect place for me, in the home with my sister. I was so excited, and a few days before Christmas, the year I turned 13, I was officially adopted. Seeing my sister in passing all these years, I'd grown jealous of her and her new family. They'd always take trips, and they had a nice house. The mom drove a really nice minivan. It was the goals to my sheltered brain. But when I moved in, I realized the grass isn't always greener on the other side. This was an all-black family, and as if coming full circle, my sister and I were abused because we were half white. We were beat with an actual wooden baseball bat nearly every day until I was 18. We were told that we were pieces of crap, that we would grow up to be just like our poor, drugged-out mom. We were not allowed to leave the house unless it was to go to church or school, and we were given no rights to friends. Anytime I made friends, she would call their mom and tell them how terrible of a person I was, so they wouldn't be allowed to hang out with me at school. Let me be clear, this woman abused all of her children, black or not. But my sister and I got the blunt end of it all. We were convinced that we had a million mental issues, that we couldn't live without this woman. And also let me clarify that none of the money she was getting was going towards us. I stopped getting new clothes in the 7th grade, and so did all of my foster siblings. The money was spent on her taking vacations with her boyfriend and cruises with her church. Oh yeah, this woman is Christian, so to say. Oh, and she was a master manipulator. She worked the system for every penny they'd give her. She never worked a single job, yet we still lived in a brand new nice house, had 2 brand new cars in the driveway. Apparently foster care had paid her extra to adopt me, and even after adoption, she got a monthly check. She got a check for all 5 of us, just for being in her house, but that's not enough for her. On top of that, social services apparently pays more if you were a broken kid. So by the end of it all, her kids were diagnosed with some disorder. I went through surgeries for epilepsy I never had, took so many different medications to treat symptoms she'd convinced me I was having. I don't know how she pulled it off, but she was able to get me and my sister registered as mentally handicapped. Cha-ching. I actually believed I was slow for so many years until I moved away. I took a test one day, and it turns out I'm actually effing genius. Like legit Mensa certified. I was the youngest of the family and by far got the worst abuse. The closer I got to 18, the worse it became. And one day it clicked. She's losing money now because we're all becoming adults. The worst thing she ever did to me was ruin college, though. I thought I was so dumb and helpless after high school because I'd applied for countless scholarships in colleges and never heard back on them. So I got a job at Wendy's right out of high school, and I walked 3 miles to and from work every day, even though she still had one of the brand new cars, and every other week she'd take my paycheck and give me $20 from it. It wasn't until later that year, as I'm taking out the garbage in the house, that I noticed a stack of mail in her garbage can. It's all addressed to me, and it's all from colleges. Over the past 3 years, I'd been accepted to 3 colleges, and I'd won 2 full rides. Of course, at this point, it was too late to take advantage of them, so I was heartbroken. One last thing about this home. After turning 18, I wasn't allowed to be in her house if she wasn't there, so countless nights were spent sleeping on her front porch because she was out on vacation. The fall of 2008, she visited family for Thanksgiving, and I was told to not come inside her house while she's gone. I can't tell if it was fate, a miracle, or just dumb luck, but as I'm walking the streets, homeless on Thanksgiving Day, a car slams on the brakes in front of me. The woman in the car stares at me blankly for what feels like 2 minutes straight, and then bursts into uncontrollable sobbing and tears. My long-lost sister, the all-white one, recognized me from an old picture and just happened to be on the same road as me at the same time. She put me in her car, and we spent the next few days meeting long-lost family members, including my bio mom. Then we went back and rescued my other sister. Like I said before, foster care was a blessing and a curse. My bio family didn't have the most growing up, and even though my sister got to stay with them, it was not peaches and cream. My family has a lot of addiction and poverty issues. I had to deal with a lot of bullcrap, and I'm so well versed in life because of it. Over the course of 23 homes, I practiced Christianity, Buddhism, Judaism, and Islam, and lived with black families, white families, Asian families. I lived with a lesbian couple, an elderly couple, and I met people all across the great state of North Carolina that I still connect with today. And all of that was by the age of 13. It's true that hardships build character because today I am one of the most accepting, loving, and giving people I know. My life is much better now. I ended up in the Pacific Northwest, and I have a very comfortable tech job, and I live in a fancy downtown high-rise with my partner and 2 babies. They're cats. I'm closing on a house in a few weeks, and I'll be moving my bio family here across the country in 15 days to help them get their lives together like I did. So, some stories do have happy endings. Story 51. I was a child of neglect and went into the system in 9th grade. I experienced love and compassion for the first time in my life. I hit the jackpot in foster families with 10 plus kids at the time who all received the same love and attention as the bio kids. We were given the option to earn our own wages at an in-house business for a max of 1 hour a day at $20. And I have no doubt that every penny they received for my care was directly used for that purpose. Clothes like I had never had, experiences, lessons, clubs, etc. It was unreal. The horror story is that a couple of months after I went back to my bio parents, I heard that their foster license was revoked due to accusation by my female roommate who had been essayed by her dad every night for 7 years, resulting in several forced abortions before age 16 and seriously effed in the head. That the father in the home had an intimate relationship with her. It could not be true. He was nothing but appropriate and kept a careful distance from the girls to avoid exactly this kind of allegation. He had thousands of opportunities to be inappropriate with me and never ever gave me the creeps. And my predator R is very accurate. Having been the victim of a lot of SA, I was an easy target. Story 52. Too long didn't read. Have so many of these stories. I was a very quiet kid who was extremely anxious in dealing with PTSD from my biological family and other foster families. So even though I was never particularly a bad kid, I got moved a lot because I never tried to fit in anywhere. I never made an effort. I should probably only tell you one story, or I will be here forever. If there's interest, I will share more. Let's go with the super religious ones who fostered me when I was 11. I was shy and anxious, but they forced me to go to youth group 3 times a week and to pray with them twice a day. If I didn't, I would have my privileges revoked, like having my clothes in my own room. Some weeks were so bad I would only have my school uniform and 1 change of clothes. When I started saving my lunch money and buying secondhand clothes so I didn't have to feel awkward and gross in the same pair of pants every day, I hid my spare clothes under my bed. When foster mom found out, she took not just the clothes, but the bed. Her reasoning was that if I didn't have a bed, I wouldn't have any place to hide extra clothes. So I had a mattress on the floor. When I hid some Easter chocolate under the edge of the mattress to save for later, it was inevitably found. My mattress was taken and given to the dog. I slept on a yoga mat on the floor with a quilt for the next 2 years. I hated going to an upper-class church with kids who only wore like full-priced surf brand stuff. You know, the brands that are like $60 a t-shirt? And there I was in the same effing set of clothes that I wore every day when I wasn't wearing my school uniform. Like, it was very obvious I didn't have other clothes. There was no way I was fitting in there. I would run into the girls' bathrooms and hyperventilate. So sometimes I would put up a fight. When it was time to get in the car, I would refuse to go. My foster parents would physically pick me up and stuff me into the car. I would cry hysterically and resist them, but my foster dad would twist my arm up behind my back and my foster mom would pull my hair. They were not afraid to hurt me. Once, a community social worker stood at the bottom of the driveway and watched them pick me up by my hair and bend my fingers backwards until it felt like they would break, and then I'd be in the car and have no option to go. Fighting them was pointless, and if I ever did more than resist them, even so much as talk back, the punishment would be so much worse. One day when my foster dad twisted my wrist and tried to twist my whole arm, but instead he managed to smash my elbow on the car door frame, I lost my head and screamed, "What the heck is wrong with you?" And they dragged me back inside into my room, onto my yoga mat. I tried to curl up into a ball so they couldn't get any part of me, but my foster dad grabbed my ankles and pulled, so I slid down, and once I was lying flat, my foster mother, who was 400 pounds minimum, sat on me. It was the worst pain I'd ever felt. I was probably 80 pounds myself and she had all her weight on my abdomen. Not only did I feel like I was being crushed, but I could not expand my lungs to breathe. I was so effing scared. It didn't matter how much I tried to suck air in, I couldn't make it work like normal, and I could feel my face going numb. She was yelling at me to apologize to my foster dad, and all I could do was shake my head because I couldn't breathe. I couldn't get air to make words, and the more I shook my head, the louder she yelled at me, and spit was flying out of her mouth and landing on my face, and I thought maybe, right here and now, I would die, and then I passed out. When I woke up, she was still in my room, and she told me that she didn't appreciate me being dramatic and faking passing out for attention, and it wouldn't work with her, and as a punishment, I wasn't allowed to eat with the family for 2 weeks. So for 2 weeks, if the family had a casserole or whatever for dinner, I would have a sandwich or fruit in the sunroom at the back of the house while they ate together in the dining room. Obviously, I didn't care about the separation, but I already didn't get a lot to eat, and it was a couple of hard weeks. There's heaps more. This is really just one event. It always stood out to me. I hate that they got away with what they did to me. They have a young kid now. I'm 25, and their real kid is like 6. Story 53. Taken away, rightfully so, from abusive parents only to end up as means of income for other abusive adults. Short stays with unfamiliar, unfit people trying to feed you as little as possible so they can maximize their earnings. A set of fancy clean clothes that are to never be touched unless a social worker visits. Then hygiene is all of a sudden a priority. Rehearsed speeches and quizzing are the most attention received to date, and the home is filled with the smell of a slow cooking stew. Duh, surprise visit. They remove you and send you to another exact copy. This one has 10 other effed up kids, the older ones abusing the younger because it's just the normality of that life. Nothing personal. If you're really lucky, you get to sleep in the same bedroom with the older kids, so you don't just get abused during the daylight hours. Now it's 24/7. Duh, they found a bruise. Next stop, the house that doesn't care about the money. That's just the extra perk included with getting to essay a young kid. Better keep your mouth shut, boy. Things can get much, much worse. Start to act out, fight in schools all the time, drugs all the time, staying away from home all the time, missing school all the time. No school counselors ask why. Why does he behave this way? Start to steal, become more violent, more bold, hoping to get arrested and sentenced to juvenile detention because it's safer than your own home. Succeed. Come out at 18, effed in the head, no skills, no education, and no hope. More of the above and go to jail. Come out, try to get housing, but that's gone. Try to get financial assistance, but you must just be scamming the system. Food stamps, nah, you have to have a job to get those. Job training? Sorry, pal, the program is full. No problem, back to jail I go. Story 54. I agree with another post that the worst feeling is knowing they're only taking you in for the money. In 10 plus homes I was thrown around within a 2-year time frame. I was never physically abused, but severely mentally abused and neglected. Not a single one of those homes gave me a good experience. Of the many homes my sister was in, I have 4, she had 1 good experience. I remember that my sister and I were placed in, didn't last more than a week, a loved flaunting basic necessities and acts of fun in front of us. For example, they made my sister and I sit on the grass and watch their bratty kids jump on the new trampoline they bought. I assume with the money they got from us. That family also secretly didn't send me to school at 6 years old. I was kept in a tiny closet with a bare cot, no light, and given a PB&J sandwich once a day. My sister accidentally got gum in her hair, and they completely cut off all her hair. For Christmas, another family had to watch their kid get awesome parents while my sister and I got their secondhand clothes as gifts. Another family knew my sister and I were lactose intolerant and purposefully made us drink glasses of milk. We threw up, of course. I have endless stories, but these are just a few. I had a ton of families just lock me in rooms for entire days with small amounts of food every now and then. That's what I thought life was supposed to be like because everyone did it to me. And now that I'm 28, it's the norm for me to assume everyone in life will let me down. Story 55. This one for me isn't so much about a specific incident in the system, just how me and my sister got in and out of it. My sister was born in '96, about a year after my dad got a non-combat assignment overseas for the Army. I was born in 2002. Since my dad got off the very occasional leaves, me and my sister grew very close throughout our upbringing, since our mother seldom actually took care of us, bar getting us food and letting us stay in the house. When I was about 4 and my sister was about 10, my non-diagnosed at the time, paranoid schizophrenic mother decided her irresponsible parenting wasn't good enough for her children. She put us both in foster care without telling anyone on either side of our families. We remained in foster care for about a year and a half. Then we were adopted by maybe 3 or 4 households. We were very, very, very thankfully never separated, since my amazing sister would physically attack anyone who attempted to separate us, which explains the 3 or 4 households in 2 years. We were hellions. Eventually, my father found out, and having no way to take care of us on his own, asked pretty much everyone on his side of the family to take care of us for him. One of my awesome aunts, living on the other side of the country, accepted to take us in. Later, since we were such misbehaved devils, our grandparents took us in instead, seeing as they were much more patient and wise. This was about 2008. My sister moved to New Mexico when she turned 18 in 2014. My dad got remarried in 2012, the same year he left the Army. 3 years later, 3 stepsisters and 2 half-sisters later, I finally moved in with my dad in 2015. Wow, that got off track fast. Story 56. So, when I was about 10 or 11, my 3 siblings and I were put into a foster care system. Long story short, my mom had to get her crap together. We were split up in pairs. My sister and youngest brother, 8 and 3-ish, were placed together, and my other brother, 6, and I were placed together. How sweet of them. The first home we went to was one of those kid collector houses. The parents had 3 kids of their own, a boy a bit younger than me, a girl about 7 or 8, and a baby, plus 4 other kids that were in the system before my brother and I got there. We literally stayed in the attic. It was a nice attic, all things considered. They had made it a kid's playroom, lots of toys, a small TV, and a race car bed. That's where my brother and I slept for the first few weeks. Then things started to get bad. Maybe I was overly protective of my brother, but I started to get suspicious of the fact that the dad bathed all the younger kids by hand. I get the babies, but anything older than like 5, and I thought it was a bit much to hand wash each kid one at a time. And when I offered to watch my brother while he took a bath, he said I couldn't, and accused me of being weird for wanting to watch him take a bath. I protested, saying I just wanted to help since he was my brother. I may have gone to school and mentioned this to the school counselor the next day. One day, the son of the foster parents came into the living room while my brother and I were watching TV. My brother was lying on the couch, and this kid came over and grabbed my brother by the arm and leg and snatches him off the couch onto the floor. I heard his head crack off the concrete. My response was insanity. I grabbed the 2-foot plastic dollhouse and smashed it into his face. He got up and I ran and chased him through the house with murderous intent. He went around the corner and scurried behind the mountain that was his father, and the father snatched me up. I told him what happened, but the little crap denied everything. The dad then dragged me to another room by my shirt, and that's when he laid it out for me. He said, "If you do anything that makes me unhappy, I can make one phone call and make sure you never see your brother again." At this point, I was boiling. I remember my face hurting from the scowl on my face. He said, "We had a girl here like you once. Thought she was smart, thought she was too smart for her own good. You think I don't know about your little phone conversations?" I had no idea what he was even talking about. I'd never used the phone in their house. I hadn't even thought of that. But he was convinced I had called my mom and she had reported something to the DCF. Probably it was from the school guidance counselor, though. He sent me to my room and then moved my brother into the downstairs bedroom with the other little kids. I cried myself to sleep that night, and every day I plotted my escape. The house was near an interstate. I thought if I could get to the road and flag someone down, I could tell them we'd been kidnapped. But I was scared that my brother would slow me down or make it more likely we got caught. I thought about whether or not I could get help and come back for him, but I couldn't imagine the thought of leaving him there. Things an 11-year-old shouldn't have to think about. Not to mention around this time I found out my grandfather had died and we weren't allowed to attend the funeral. So at my next visit to the school guidance counselor, I told her everything. The threats, the potential SA, the incident with the son, and I begged her to help me. A few days later, our social worker showed up to school and picked us up. took us back to their house to get our stuff, and took us away. Now my story takes a turn for the better. In the car, the social worker asked me if I knew Dr. E. I'd only been going to the school for a month or so, but everyone knew Dr. E was my school principal. Well, apparently news of what had happened had gotten around to her, and she immediately went to DCF and asked how to become a temporary guardian for these poor boys. And just like that, we were saved. Dr. E was a cool old lady in her mid-50s with grown kids of her own. She lived in a really nice house, and she had an awesome Cocker Spaniel named Steve. She taught me that strawberries in Reese's Puff cereal is amazing, and she made great pancakes. She had these two friends also. This old couple whose names I can't remember, but they were loaded and bought us tons of new clothes and took us out to do all sorts of fun things. Needless to say, our lives got a lot better, but it still wasn't home. After a few months, our social worker showed up again and said to pack our things, we were going. I overheard something about temporary guardianship and time limitations, but everything was hush-hush. We were taken to Cracker Barrel for food, and then we went to see Mrs. Brown, this really old lady who lived alone in a tiny trailer, where we stayed the night, and I overheard the social worker telling her that she would be back for us in the morning, and we were going home. That was the best night's sleep I've gotten in my whole life. We woke up early and walked to the park with Mrs. Brown. Then social worker came and got us. We sat in the DCF office for, I crap you not, 11 hours, I counted, before they loaded us back into a car and we drove off. It wasn't long before I started recognizing streets and landmarks, and I told my brother we were going to see Grandma very soon. His face lit up. When we pulled into the same yard in the same vehicle we were taken away, and I saw my mom and grandmother in the front yard smiling and crying. They weren't speaking the last time I saw them. We ran together. After all the crying was done, we hugged the social worker, and she told me how brave and smart I was. I asked where my sister and other brother were, and why they hadn't come home too, and they said that it wasn't time yet. Turns out some families like little redheaded girls and baby boys with blonde hair, enough to attempt to backdoor adopt them and attempt to change their names illegally to match the families. Eventually, though, we were all home. After they took us, my mom and grandmother set aside their problems and worked together to do what had to be done to get us back. There was a plan for a rescue attempt. My mom had posted on message boards all over what passed for the internet in 2002, found us, and was working out the best way to come steal us back. Thankfully, she just got her crap together and did it legally. We mourned the death of my grandfather and came a little closer as family. It was the worst 6 months of my life, and I rarely tell this story because it sounds unbelievable. But 17 years later, it's still something that's lasted with me. Questions are welcome. Story 57. F me, is it my time to shine? I was in foster care from 4 to 16 and was a horror shadow that ruined my life and turned me into a monster. And I'm going to start off by saying that this is going to be one long rambling mess. My real father was arrested for something like 32 counts of SA when he violated his parole while trying to take his daughter to an abortion clinic upstate. Then it was chaos. For the first some number of years, we moved homes almost weekly. It was mostly just what I will call foster farming. That is, foster parents who designed their houses to keep as many children at once to maximize the government payouts while minimizing expenses. Probably the most crazy examples was this lady whose house was nigh baby-proofed. We, that is my brother and I, came in the middle of the night to her house. The first room looked fine. It was a living room with a small coffee table and an old TV. The kind with 2 knobs instead of buttons seemed fairly normal looking. It was a great first impression for social workers. Immaculately kept. We later found out that we all ate at the coffee table while sitting on the ground to avoid falls. Foster parents are liable for the bills if they qualify for insurance, so everything had to be baby-proofed. All of the corners in the house had cloth bundle taped to them. The only cups she had were small pink sippy cups, the kind a toddler might use after upgrading from a baby bottle. For some reason, the only thing she let us drink was strawberry milk. I'm not too sure why that one was. That was all in the kitchen, through an open wall adjoining it to the living room. It, too, looked fairly normal, ignoring the taped corners and carpet floors. No slipping on her watch. Then you come to the playroom. Guys, I can't even explain in a way that will impart upon you the full impact of the situation. This was a massive room. You could very clearly see the lines on the wall, where a wall separating what used to be 2 already large rooms was DIY knocked down and patched. This room was half the size of a rather large house, and the floor was covered in tiny mattresses, like 20 or 30 of them. Even as a roughly 6 or 7-year-old child, I didn't fit on them. They were the kinds of things you put in the bottom of a baby's crib, though not the kind that folds up. Seriously, they covered the floor to the point that the only real walking space was along the edges of the room. Along one wall of the room was a single, albeit large, toy chest. Adjacent to that was an electric piano. Despite having plastic keys, looked fairly expensive. It had a wooden frame. On the floor, there were maybe 8 other kids, though they were asleep at the time we first arrived. The lady herself was drill army strict. We weren't allowed to leave the playroom during the day outside of mealtimes, in which we all crowded around the one coffee table to eat off of plastic trays and with toddler utensils. The plastic knives weren't even serrated. We were allowed to play freely, but we had to be absolutely silent. No banging, no shouting. If she could hear even talking, you were scolded. We passed a lot of notes. We went outside for an hour a day in the morning. She called it recess, though there was nothing out there but a small 2-person swing set and an old red trike. Mostly we just played tag. We stayed at that home for about a week, maybe a few days before leaving. I'm not sure why we left. You're not told. That came to be a normal part of life. We moved around homes near weekly for the next few years. A lot more foster homes, but some nice people. I remember this one lady. She had 2 kids of her own. That was super nice. We even stayed with her for a whole 2 months. Had I known it was an option at the time, I would have asked her to adopt me. We played video games, and on the weekdays we went to a restaurant where she worked. In the mornings, before they opened, we got to help if we wanted to. Things like prepping the silverware bundles and the super fun pulling the lever to lower the massive metal shell on the giant industrial dishwasher they had in the kitchen. I remember for my birthday, I was about 8 or 9 by now, I got a present. It was the first birthday present I had ever received. It wasn't even much, it was just an old Spider-Man lunchbox that came with a coloring book and some crayons. I loved it. Despite eating in the restaurant, I carried it with me every day. Spider-Man was so cool. By the way, Tobey Maguire will always be my one true Spider-Man. I was heartbroken to later learn that people didn't like it the way he played the character. Foster Lady was great though, although she had a strange logic about fairness. When we were in the car on one of the first nights, I fell asleep. Everyone else got cookies from this drive-through bakery place while I was asleep. She bought me a cookie too, but I couldn't have it. She claimed it wasn't fair to the other children that I got a cookie and they didn't, even if it was making up for me not getting a cookie when they did originally. Child in me did not like that logic. It wasn't like I was upset or anything. I didn't get mad, just like, dang, I slept through a cookie opportunity. Are you kidding me? I think that was the end of the napping for me. I remember on Easter, after closing the restaurant, we had an Easter egg hunt. That was another first. Hidden all around the restaurant were tons of plastic eggs. Well hidden too. I remember this one in particular in which I was standing in the middle of the dining area scanning around for more eggs. I saw a foster lady. I wish I remembered her name, but I was young and she insisted that we call her Mom, standing by the door to watch me. She looked at me and jerked towards one of the tables. Taped underneath was the golden egg, basically the holy grail. It was a giant golden plastic egg with a special prize inside of it, part of their tradition every year. This year it was a $5 bill and a Reese's cup. I was ecstatic. This was more money than I'd ever seen. It was great. Then one day we were woken up in the middle of the night and taken away. I never found out why. Everything seemed so great. It was the first and last time I'd be really happy for a really long time. But yeah, we left. Then of course everything went bad. We moved into this woman's massive 2-story house of a woman named Mima. It seemed great. She bought us gifts for the first few weeks. I should say that from here, my memory is sort of fragmented. There are a lot of events, but I can't tell what order they happened in. My therapist says that it's a normal symptom of severe trauma, so understand that what I say here might be severely misordered. I won't really be talking in terms of time. We were there for 4 years, and it all feels nearly, literally, as if each event happened yesterday. Then the abuse started. We were beat by her 3 adult children near daily. We weren't allowed access to phones, and this is about when the flaws of the foster care program became clear. There were monthly, I think it might have been more or less time between visits, home visits from our guardian and Lidum. They only inspected damage that was visible on our arms, legs, and faces. There was no inspection of any area hid by clothing. We could tell, sure, but there was also no requirement for the foster family to see the child alone. Mima was always in the room, listening. In retrospect, we could have told and had been taken immediately, but none of us at the time knew that. We kept our mouths shut for fear of punishment. We got punished, usually. They escalated over time. We were beaten with bags of fruit, perhaps because that's what they had in their hand. We were whipped and stripped with wires as we walked around the house, sometimes tied down and whipped until we bled. I got tied up a lot. I remember one time I was bound and thrown into the pool. I remember the feeling of drowning, but my memory blacked out the surrounding parts of it. I don't know why they did it or how I got out. I imagine someone helped once they realized that I might actually die. They had to have. It's not like a boy my age was going to be able to fight through knots tied by adults. Other things, they would regularly tie me up and allow their dog to essay me. The particularly horrible part about that is that there were moments that it felt good. Those moments were rare, but more common. The more that it happened, I never wanted it to happen, and I still have nightmares about it. I feel disgusting. What kind of monster enjoys that, to any degree? During the summer, they would lock me in an empty room with no food for days. As long as a week, regularly. Nearly 2 was the worst. Just white walls and a tile floor. I had binge eating problems for years. It's only started to get better now that I'm in total control over my access to food since college started. I think that was the worst though. Everything else would be over quickly, but that was torture. Sitting there, starving. It's the kind of pain that grows until it can't grow anymore, and then it goes away and it turns you hollow. Like there's a real pit in your stomach that makes you want to die. It doesn't hurt anymore, it just makes you want to die. The room made it worse. It was all white, they kept a light on all the time. You couldn't tell how much time had passed. I spent a lot of time then imagining scenarios in which I killed them. Slowly. Make them feel everything they did to me all at once and to not stop until they were gone. That part stayed with me. I still want that. My therapist thinks I associated the joy of power over my abusers in my fantasies with the act of cutting people up. I get manic sometimes and I plan to hurt them. I have to live alone to give myself time to call the emergency line. That room destroyed me. I'll always be like this, I think. Those fantasies are the only things I feel anymore. My job now is to make sure they stay fantasies. Their room was just especially bad, because once the hunger turned hollow, you would lose your only metric for time, the hunger that was growing. The next time they feed you, it's so wonderful that it makes you not care what they do to you just so long as they don't stop feeding you again. All the beatings, the shopping, the dog essay, it was all okay so long as they fed me. At some point I turned callous. Like a switch had flipped. I came out of the room one time after a little over a week and I didn't care about anything. It was like the hollow from the hunger never went away after that. I mean, I wasn't hungry once I ate, but I never stopped feeling hollow. When you're that hungry, nothing matters but food. After I ate though, well then just nothing mattered at all. They got mad at me for not responding when they opened the door and broke my finger, and I still didn't care. I remember it hurting. I even remember screaming when they did it, but the pain didn't matter anymore. I used my splint from the last time and then a sandwich. After that, it's all a blur. We were there for another 2 years, totaling 4. We moved around homes rapid fire again. 1 week, move. 2 weeks, move. 1 week, eventually we were found and adopted by my actual aunt. I never liked them. I know I should, but I just don't. Being actual family, I think they were too close to everything that happened. Those desires to kill happened a lot around them. I had to go to a short-term psych facility a few times when I couldn't control myself. Eventually, it got so bad that the only solution is to cut ties. Now the fantasies happen, but they're just that. In the same way you might dream of living in a mansion, but knowing that it will never happen. I've got to keep my distance, though. I can't have friends or relationships. People get too close, then they see the monster I hide so well, and I become branded a psycho. I learned that pretty quickly. So in real life, I keep to myself. Online, I get to talk people, pretend I'm normal, and there's no risk of hurting them. Really, I'm genuinely a good person, I think. I do community work and tutor other students for free when they need help. People just seem to not understand that good person and murderer are not mutually exclusive. I haven't killed anyone yet, but I've always wanted to. If I could, I would get rid of the desire. I just can't. It's a part of me. I just have to stay alone so I can keep a mask up. If no one gets too close, they can't probe enough to get around the good guy perception that I wish I could be. That's the only part of me that I want to be real. I've settled for it being the only part of me that I show the world. It's almost the same, and I sort of have a social life because of it. Story 58. I am the biological child, and my mother has 2 foster children. We are now adults. I was an adult when my mother decided to foster, and they are very much my siblings. They were 2 and 4 when they came to us. When they were little, I often worked extra hours so that I could afford to spoil these kids. I loved them so much, I even moved home to help care for them. They each had serious emotional and behavioral problems due to the neglect they had to endure. It took years to get them used to the fact that we loved them and would fight for them. The worst part was that the mother would act like she was getting her crap together, and we were genuinely excited for the kids to get to have visitations with her. Then she would show up drunk or high, and we would have to turn her away. It was always hard to watch my siblings hurt. Now as adults, their mother is finally clean, but they have nothing to do with her and claim my family as theirs. I have a child of my own, and she loves her aunt and uncle. I know this sounds like a made-for-TV movie, but it was not easy. We had nights where I would sleep on the floor in my sister's room because she had horrible nightmares about what she had been through. My mother didn't date while the kids were young because they were always scared she would fall in love and the guy would make her give them up. My mother would never let that happen. But their biological mother often picked a man over her kids, and the thought of her dating caused my brother to have many panic attacks. They had been abused, so discipline had to be creative and relevant to the offense that they were punished for, or they didn't understand and it didn't work. The oldest still has food issues from not being taken care of. Story 59. I have a weird, different kind of story. I was only in foster care for about 6 months while my dad went through some issues. I was in 6th grade. My sister and I were placed with a family who had one daughter, whom they had adopted after fostering her for several years. All seemed well at first. In fact, they were rather nice people. Only weird thing was the first day they said we were free to call them mom and dad, which we didn't. But after a while, we began to see another side of the mother. She was incredibly possessive, especially so of their daughter. She would get into fights with her and say awful things like, "You don't actually think I'm your mom. You still love your real mom, don't you?" She was constantly in my sister and I's business. At one point, I had invited one of our social workers to a softball game, and when I got back to the house, she went absolutely apecrap that I didn't invite her, said I should love her more, and that the social worker was a female dog. I couldn't believe how much she absolutely demanded my love. I found out that they actually adopted another girl around the same time as their current daughter, also from the foster care system, but after a few years, she had hilariously enough gone back to her actual mother. I think they were pressuring these kids to let them adopt them. While money may have been a factor, I wholly believe it was this obsession with being loved that was what drove them to being a foster family. Even after we got out, they would harass us. There was one point where they came to our house years later to scream at my younger sister for being friends with one of their daughter's friends, saying she stole her. The father was an alright guy, but he sat idly while the wife was an absolute monster. Story 60. This is my dad's story from the 1950s. My grandmother left my dad and his 3 siblings, who were all under the age of 5, at home while she went to the grocery store. My grandfather had recently abandoned the family. She came home to find the apartment building burned down and all the children outside in the snow with the police and fire department there. My father had been playing hide and seek and lit a match in the linen closet because it was dark, he thought. The children were taken away and put in an orphanage for 2 years. They can only play outside on the weekends for a short time, and they always wonder if they will ever see their mother again. Sometimes she might come once in the month. Nuns whip them and psychologically harm them, but at least they have each other. One day my grandmother arrives at the orphanage to take them out. She has a new husband who moves the children to a new state, converts them to a new religion, and changes their last name to a name that everyone makes fun of because it's also the name of something perverted in English, but not in the language of its origin. The stepfather, a former military man, beats my grandmother and the children terribly. He takes the kids to the woodshed and beats them with his belt constantly where they can't even sit down. They continue to endure this until they move out or run away as teenagers. My dad's twin brother ended up an alcoholic and drug addict who abandoned his own family and now has brain injuries from being beaten as a kid. One brother died of an early death in a heart attack. My dad got his degree, was in the military, has his own business, and is super religious, but has been the best father to me. Alright guys, that concludes our stories of unfortunate abuse and neglect and hardships and trials and manipulation. I think for one, this is a good perspective shift for people who don't have to go through this kind of stuff. I for one am very grateful. And two, I guess pay attention more. I mean, there's so many people who do speak out and they do try and people just don't listen. Again, I don't have the solution. I don't know what the answers are, but if you want to help me and help other people, feel free to write that down below because we're all just trying to make it. We all deserve love. We all deserve to be happy. But for now, all I'll say is that I'm praying for you guys. I'm wishing the best for you guys, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.